What if everything you learned about queens was a lie? Forget tiaras and tea parties. These women wore cobra venom as perfume, ruled from behind golden screens, and sent treaties by turtle. Welcome to the royal court you never met in school. 99 queens, each more unhinged, brilliant, and terrifying than the last. This isn't history, it's a fever dream wrapped in silk and strategy. And by the end, you'll never hear the word queen without checking for poison or parrots. Buckle up. The crown is heavier and weirder than you think. Before we dive headfirst into royal madness, hit that subscribe button unless you want to miss the next time a queen feeds her enemies camel urine perfume. And while you're here, drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it right now? We want to know who else is up at 3 a.m. learning about monarchs who used pet bears for revenge. Empress Wu Zetian's teenage spy poets. Here's a fun brain teaser. What do you get when you combine teenage hormones, government espionage, and the Chinese imperial court? Answer: poetry. Glorious state-sponsored dirt-dishing poetry. Empress Wu Zetian, China's only female emperor, and possibly its only goth fangirl in silk brocade, recruited teenage girls as secret agents. But not just any secret agents. These girls reported palace gossip, betrayals, and bureaucratic shade in verse form. That's right, they were high school slam poets with security clearance. Every haiku could be your last. Ministers and courtiers were unknowingly starring in a never-ending, weaponized poetry. Anthology. Imagine getting fired because someone rhymed your bribe with slime and time. The Empress didn't just tolerate this madness, she orchestrated it. And she preferred it sung. Yes, Wu Zetian enjoyed intelligence reports performed in melodic stanzas, possibly accompanied by a guzheng solo. It's no wonder half her court walked around looking permanently confused. Anyone could be an informant. That girl arranging peonies? Spy. That servant reciting Tang poetry at dinner? Spy. That bird chirping suspiciously in 5 syllables? Spy. And if you think teenage spies are weird, wait until you hear about a queen who gave TED Talks in flapper dresses during a war. Queen Soraya Tarzi wore flapper dresses and a microphone. In the 1922nd, while Europe was trying to forget how bad trench foot smelled, Afghanistan was dealing with Queen Soraya Tarzi, a reformist, a rebel, and an absolute style icon. Soraya didn't just defy tradition, she waltzed through it in a sleeveless satin dress, heels clicking on ancient marble floors like gunshots. This queen appeared in public wearing flapper fashion, spoke at rallies with her husband, and scandal of scandals talked in front of men. The horror. Local conservatives clutched their turbans. But Soraya didn't care. She once gave a public speech about women's education while wearing lipstick so bold it could have declared independence. She and her husband, King Amanullah, tried to drag Afghanistan into modernity by sheer force of will and a wardrobe full of Paris imports. Unfortunately, this went over about as well as jazz music at a funeral. Religious leaders accused her of corrupting society. Foreign observers either called her brilliant or blasphemous. There was no middle ground. Eventually, backlash forced the royal couple into exile. But Soraya's legacy remained, a trail of silk dresses, broken taboos, and a reminder that sometimes progress comes in heels. And speaking of taboo-breaking queens, one royal used enchanted hairpins and shamanic codes to avoid death, kind of. Empress Myeongseong's hairpins and ghost codes. Korean Empress Myeongseong lived in a world where assassination was practically a love language, and she got the message loud and clear. So she responded the only way a true empress could, with psychic warfare and covert hair accessories. Her court was crawling with spies. Her enemies included the Japanese military, and yet she somehow managed to turn her own hair into a Cold War device. Hidden in her hairpins were secret codes, delicate, deadly little weapons disguised as fashion. The hairpins weren't just decorative, they were encryption. Morse code meets Marie Antoinette. But Myeongseong didn't stop there. No, she went full metaphysical. She consulted with court shamans who offered protective rituals, omens, and questionable astrology. They'd warn her which mirror not to look into, which floorboards were cursed, and which soups had betrayal in them. She took their advice seriously. Very seriously. Spoiler, it still didn't save her. Despite her efforts, Empress Myeongseong was eventually assassinated by a group that reportedly stormed her quarters dressed as monks. Even the shamans didn't see that plot twist coming. So yes, the hairpin encryption failed, but it definitely set the bar. Because the next queen used poison trials to determine guilt. Sip wisely. Queen Ranavalona eyes poison trials of justice. Ranavalona I of Madagascar ruled with a philosophy best described as murder-adjacent bureaucracy. She believed in order, tradition, and testing guilt with a method so unscientific it made medieval Europe look like Silicon Valley. Her legal system involved poison trials. You got accused of a crime? Great, time to drink some soup. This wasn't just any soup. It was a toxic brew made from the tangina nut, a charming little botanical death trap. Accused citizens were forced to gulp it down while officials watched like it was a cooking show from hell. If you vomited it up and survived, congratulations, innocent. If you died, guilty, logical, efficient, slightly genocidal. Ranavalona didn't stop at criminals. Suspect a courtier of gossip? Soup. Rumors of dissent? Soup. Looked at her funny? Soup. She practically turned paranoia into a culinary art. Under her reign, thousands died through these trials, but she viewed it as divine justice, a spiritual audit, Malagasy edition. And the people? They adapted. Superstitions flourished. No one trusted food. Citizens started practicing daily mini-purges just in case, but survival meant status. Living through poison became a resume bullet. But if you think that's obsessive, wait until you meet a Chinese empress who had her husband's art altered because she couldn't stand sharing a painting. Empress Dugu Qieluo's jealousy repainted history. Empress Dugu Qieluo had one golden rule for her husband. Don't even look. She wasn't just jealous, she was logistically, architecturally, historically jealous. Her husband, Emperor Wen of Sui, tried to be a model ruler, but Dugu didn't care. If another woman made eye contact with him for more than 3 seconds, she considered it an act of war. She banned him from concubines, courtesans, even statues of women that looked a bit too curvy. But the masterpiece? She had portraits of his past, revised. Painters were summoned to erase any trace of former flings, background maidens, or symbolic femininity. She had royal art edited like it was a high school yearbook photo. Can we just Photoshop her out? Yes, we can. The Empress didn't stop at visual erasure. She controlled court life so tightly that ministers nicknamed her the Second Emperor, often behind closed doors and preferably far away from any hairpins. Ironically, her obsession with loyalty helped stabilize the empire. No affairs meant fewer palace scandals. Dugu Qieluo turned jealousy into governance, art censorship into policy. Her grip on her husband became legend. But when it comes to queens who went a bit further with their conquests, wait until you hear about one who killed her lovers at sunrise. Queen Amina of Zazao slept, conquered, and killed. Queen Amina of Zhao didn't just conquer cities, she collected them like lovers, and sometimes they were lovers. According to local lore, after a successful military campaign, she would choose a man from the newly conquered city to spend the night with her. Romantic? Sort of. Deadly? Absolutely. The morning after, he'd be executed. No goodbyes, no breakfast, no awkward small talk. Just silence and a shovel. Some say it was for secrecy, no pillow talk leaks allowed. Others believe it was ritualistic, a way of consuming victory in full. Either way, if Queen Amina made eye contact with you after battle, it might have been the last thing you ever saw. She ruled the Hausa city-state of Zazao, modern-day Nigeria, with military brilliance. Her armies expanded the kingdom across vast territories, and she built walled cities known as Amina Walls, some of which still stand today. But her name became legend not just for what she built, but how she ruled with steel, charm, and terrifying postcoital silence. Her story blurs myth and history, leaving us to wonder how much was real and how much was whispered fear. But if you thought she was mysterious, wait until you meet a Japanese queen who ruled through a man possessed by her ghost. Queen Himiko ruled Japan through seance and silence. Queen Himiko of ancient Japan understood power on a spectral level. She didn't scream orders or host royal parades, she whispered through a proxy and let the supernatural do the talking. According to early Chinese records, Himiko ruled not with a crown but with spells. She was a shaman queen, allegedly so spiritually charged that she couldn't be in public without sending storms into existential crisis. Himiko rarely appeared in person. Instead, she communicated through a male medium, her spiritual mouthpiece. Think of it like a haunted puppet show, except the ghost was a queen, and the puppet was a terrified man trying not to faint. Foreign diplomats described her realm as eerily quiet, like a nation holding its breath. No riots, no dissent. Just an invisible queen watching everything, speaking through others, and possibly hexing your ancestors if you mispronounced her name. Neighbors were so terrified of her that they avoided war altogether. Some claimed her rituals caused floods. Others believed she could bend clouds. Whether true or not, it worked. Fear is a very effective foreign policy. But if you think ruling by ghost proxy is strange, wait until you hear about an empress who screamed at her mirror because it might have had a dead eunuch inside. If you've made it this far through poison trials, secret agent poetry, and seance queens, it's safe to say you're one of us. So go ahead, subscribe to the channel for more Midnight Monarch chaos. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it right now? Bonus points if you're listening in the dark, surrounded by haunted furniture. Empress Dowager Cixi and the Haunted Mirror Meltdown. Empress Dowager Cixi ruled Qing China like a grand matron of the underworld, equal parts floral elegance and absolute terror. But behind the silks and peacock feather fans was a woman who once completely lost her imperial composure over a mirror. She reportedly stormed through her palace, shrieking that her dressing mirror was cursed, haunted by the ghost of a dead eunuch. And she wasn't being metaphorical. Cixi believed his spirit had taken residence inside the glass and was watching her, possibly judging her, maybe critiquing her hair. Either way, she had it smashed to pieces and ordered an exorcism, as one does when you suspect your furniture of espionage. This wasn't an isolated breakdown. Cixi had a complicated relationship with paranoia, control, and shiny surfaces. She trusted no one, loved opulence, and wielded soft power like a dagger dipped in rosewater. Her court operated under constant surveillance, and dissenters often vanished, sometimes into mirrors, one presumes. The incident with the eunuch mirror only reinforced what many suspected. The Empress saw threats everywhere, living, dead, and occasionally reflective. And if keeping haunted household items in check seems stressful, imagine composing lullabies to your husband's embalmed heart. Queen Maria Eleonora and the Golden Heart in a box. If grief had a brand ambassador, it would have been Queen Maria Eleonora of Sweden. When her husband, King Gustavus Adolphus, died in battle, she didn't just mourn him, she curated the mourning. Specifically, by preserving his heart in a box of gold. Because what says eternal devotion like home decor made from a dead king's cardiac tissue? She kept the box near her at all times. She reportedly slept with it, talked to it, sang to it, created lullabies for their daughter about the heart. Imagine being a toddler and hearing bedtime rhymes about your father's embalmed remains. Sweet dreams, royalty style. Her court was disturbed. Her daughter, Queen Christina, would grow up to famously hate marriage and possibly all forms of intimacy, go figure. Maria Eleonora's grief morphed into something operatic. She insisted that her husband's room remain untouched. His blood-stained clothes were laid out like modern art. No one was allowed to smile in her presence for months. This wasn't mourning, it was performance art with a body count. And if turning a heart into a bedtime story seems dark, wait until we tell you about a queen who built an entire church inspired by her favorite hairpin. Queen Tamar built a church for her hairpin. Queen Tamar of Georgia didn't just lead a kingdom, she curated it like a Renaissance Pinterest board. In one of her more delightfully strange architectural moves, she had a church built in the shape of her favorite hairpin. Not a grand symbol of the cross, or a towering homage to saints, no. She looked at her grooming kit and thought, yes, this shall be divine. But Tamar didn't stop at ecclesiastical hair accessory cosplay. She reportedly made all the monks wear robes inspired by her childhood doll's clothes. That means burly, bearded men of faith were pacing through candlelit stone corridors dressed like Barbie's dream friars. Tamar, of course, thought this was spiritually motivating and possibly hilarious. Despite the quirky aesthetic, Tamar was one of Georgia's most formidable rulers. Her reign marked the golden age of Georgian history. But underneath the military campaigns and legal reforms was a ruler who gleefully blended piety with personal flair. The woman made hairpins sacred and monkwear whimsical. And if you think appointing doll-robed clergy is weird, wait until you hear about the Japanese empress who gave religious authority to a man who spoke to a cow. Empress Shotoku and the talking cow monk. Let's begin with a simple rule of spiritual leadership. If someone tells you a cow talks to them, maybe double-check the incense. Unless you're Empress Shotoku of Japan, then you promote them. Straight to the top. Shotoku, ruling during the Nara period, was an empress with strong opinions on religion and, apparently, livestock. One day, a monk claimed a cow had begun speaking divine messages to him. Instead of politely ignoring him or prescribing a vacation, she gave him power. Lots of it. She made him head of religious affairs. The nation's spiritual pulse now lay in the hooves of a divine bovine and its interpreter. Her court, predictably, panicked. But she held firm. This wasn't superstition, it was management, Shotoku style. She believed the monk was in contact with higher powers, and whether those powers chewed cud was irrelevant. Under her rule, spiritual legitimacy was flexible, occasionally hoofed, and potentially mooing. This wasn't the only eccentric decision of her reign, but it certainly left a hoofprint on imperial history. And if cow-whispering monks sound odd, buckle up because the next queen carried her dead husband's body across an entire kingdom to stop other women from touching him. Queen Joanna of Castile and the Dead Husband Tour. Queen Joanna of Castile wasn't just a ruler, she was grief incarnate in a royal gown. After her husband Philip the Handsome died, we're not editorializing, that was literally his nickname, Joanna refused to bury him. Instead, she launched a one-woman funeral parade across Spain, taking his coffin with her for months. Every night, she had the casket open to check that no woman had tried to get too friendly with the corpse. Yes, she was that possessive. Death, to Joanna, wasn't a deal-breaker, it was just a relationship complication. Court officials tried to intervene, but she dismissed them all. Her love, she insisted, was eternal and jealous. Her behavior earned her the nickname Juana la Loca, Joanna the Mad. But beneath the sensationalism was a woman crushed by grief, suffocated by a crown, and betrayed by a court that wanted her quietly out of the way. Her breakdown became political leverage. They called her mad and locked her up. But long before her exile, Joanna's macabre royal tour scandalized the continent. It was mourning as possession, devotion as delusion. And if you think that's dramatic, wait until you meet the Egyptian queen who dressed like a hawk married to a weather cloud. Queen T looked like a hawk married to a cloud. Queen T of Egypt didn't just walk into a room she floated in, flanked by birds, feathers, and enough atmospheric drama to qualify as weather. Her signature fashion? A hairpiece so extravagant, so feathery, so towering that priests once joked she looked like a hawk's cousin who married a cloud. And they weren't wrong. Her headdress was essentially a birdwatcher's fever dream. But underneath the plumage was a queen who wielded immense political influence. As the wife of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, T broke precedent by being named Great Royal Wife in public inscriptions, appearing beside her husband as an equal, not a decorative afterthought. But even her diplomacy had flair. Her correspondence with foreign rulers often included perfume-scented papyri and references to omens read in flamingo flocks. Her fashion was more than aesthetics, it was authority by altitude. The higher the hair, the closer to the gods, and if the gods weren't impressed, well, she could always add another egret. In a court full of gold and granite, T stood out with softness avian couture with political punch. And if you thought being excluded from a royal event was petty, wait until you hear about the Empress who refused to show up unless her dog got an escort. Empress Masako's dog demanded an escort. Japanese Empress Masako once looked at a palace event, scanned the guest list, and said, "Wait, where's my dog's security detail?" When informed that her canine companion wouldn't be receiving a royal escort, she simply didn't attend. Protocol? Denied. Ceremony? Cancelled. Without fluffball security, there would be no Empress. This wasn't just diva behavior, it was a line in the sand. Masako's dog wasn't just a pet, it was a confidant, therapist, and emotional support being rolled into a ball of royal fur. The Empress, already battling the pressures of the chrysanthemum throne and intense public scrutiny, drew the line at canine neglect. If her four-legged friend wasn't safe, she wasn't showing up. The imperial court was flustered. Decades of strict protocol had not prepared them for an empress boycotting a ceremony over pet logistics, but Masako didn't flinch. In a system where everyone plays roles, she quietly reminded them she was still a person with boundaries, burnout, and a beloved Shih Tzu who refused to be left behind. And if that sounds unusual, just wait. The next queen ruled a nation by pretending her dead husband was still alive and issued royal decrees from behind a curtain. Queen Shahar al-Dur ruled from behind the curtain and the grave. When Queen Shahar al-Dur's husband died, she didn't do the traditional mourning routine. She did something infinitely more ambitious. She decided he would continue ruling. The problem? He was extremely dead. The solution? Curtains, deception, and a little creative ghostwriting. For weeks, some say months, she concealed his death and issued decrees in his name. Ministers lined up outside his quarters, unaware that the Sultan was basically Weekend at Bernie's, Mamluk edition. Shajar al-Dur would speak from behind a screen, imitating his voice or having his commands read aloud. Anyone who questioned this strange arrangement mysteriously lost their job or their pulse. Eventually, the truth emerged, but by then, Shajar had proven she could run the empire better than any man, and she did. She became Sultana in her own name, a rarity in Islamic history. Her rise was ruthless, brilliant, and laced with the dark humor of pretending your dead spouse is still on the throne. She held power with poise and poison, elegance and manipulation. But if commanding armies from behind velvet drapes sounds intense, wait until you meet the Empress who literally gave birth while writing war speeches. Empress Zhangsun gave birth, then gave orders. Some people multitask by checking emails while cooking. Empress Zhangsun of China? She wrote political speeches while in labor. Mid-contraction, she was editing policy. Mid-delivery, she was dictating strategy. She gave birth in a battlefield tent and then, while her newborn still hadn't opened its eyes, reviewed military logistics with generals too afraid to question anything. Her husband, Emperor Taizong of Tang, relied on her intellect like it was a divine cheat code. Zhangsun wasn't just a ceremonial empress. She was a political force dressed in silk and fortified by steel willpower. She drafted decrees, advised on legal reforms, and still managed to be polite about it. People feared her, but they also kind of wanted to be her. The battlefield birth became legend, not just because of its absurd heroism, but because it proved what Zhangsun was made of: nerve, brains, and maybe a slight disdain for rest. Even after giving birth, she didn't sleep. She strategized. The generals looked exhausted just being in the same tent. And if you think that's dramatic, wait until you meet the queen who burned down an entire city using pigeons armed with fire, Queen Olga of Kiev, and the flaming pigeons of revenge. When Queen Olga of Kiev said she wanted revenge, she meant scorched earth and maybe scorched sky, too. After a rebel tribe killed her husband, they expected diplomacy. Instead, they got a 4-part vengeance opera that peaked with flaming pigeons. Yes, actual birds, on fire. Olga requested a peace tribute of birds from every household in the rebel city, just some humble pigeons, nothing suspicious. The townspeople obliged, thinking maybe she was lonely. But Olga had each pigeon tied with a sulfurous cloth, set aflame, and released back home. They flew to their cozy little nests, tucked into thatched rooftops, and ignited the entire city. The town burned from the sky down. No walls were breached, no soldiers marched, just a flock of tiny, furious firebombs returning home. And as the flames rose, Olga declared a feast. For the birds, of course. The irony was gourmet. But she wasn't just a pyromaniac with wings, she later became a saint. Let that simmer. The woman who weaponized pigeons was canonized. Still, at least she didn't make her servants speak only in palindromes, like the Egyptian queen coming up next. Queen Khenemetneferhetjet's palindromic palace protocol. Queen Khenemetneferhetjet of Egypt believed balance was divine. Symmetry wasn't just an aesthetic, it was the operating system of her soul. Which is probably how she ended up enforcing the most bizarre court rule in pharaonic HR history. Everyone cleaning her chambers had to speak exclusively in palindromes. Yes, while dusting, sweeping, or scrubbing, servants had to communicate in perfectly mirrored phrases. "Madam, I'm Adam," suddenly became not a cheesy pickup line, but valid workplace language. Legend has it that one overachieving servant accidentally invented a man, a plan, a canal, Panama, while wiping her perfume vials. The queen believed palindromes harnessed cosmic harmony. Words that looped were protective spells. Misaligned language could, apparently, summon bad energy or worse, awkward silences. As a result, the palace echoed with strange chants that sounded like verbal backflips. New hires often wept. No one dared question her rule. After all, this was a queen, with a name longer than some scrolls. If you can memorize Kenemetnefer Hedjet, you can probably survive a day of verbal yoga. But if reverse speak made sounds strange, just wait until you meet the empress who used perfume mixed with cobra venom to glow too brightly to curse. Empress Gi's venom-infused perfume of power. Empress Gi of the Yuan dynasty didn't just walk into a room, she radiated into it, in a cloud of perfume so potent it could drop a man at 10 paces. That wasn't just high-end fragrance. It was a homemade blend of pearl powder and cobra venom. She called it aura enhancement. Everyone else called it a deeply unsettling beauty routine. To Empress Gi, ordinary beauty was for concubines. She aimed for something more, cosmically untouchable. Her signature scent wasn't designed to attract, it was meant to repel curses. According to her beliefs, the venom purified her spiritual field, and the pearls made her shine with divine approval. Basically, she weaponized skincare. Courtiers were terrified. They'd bow from a distance. Eunuchs developed nosebleeds. Rumors swirled that her scent could cause hallucinations, but no one dared complain out loud. After all, Gi was not just a consort turned empress, she was a political hurricane, smart, ruthless, and shimmering with toxins. And if poisoning your pulse points sounds intense, you'll love what comes next. A queen who rules a modern kingdom, answers YouTube questions, and drinks bubble tea like it's a national duty. Queen Rania of Jordan, royals, YouTube, and bubble tea. Queen Rania of Jordan might just be the only monarch to explain palace life while sipping bubble tea in Converse. If you ever wondered what it would look like if Grace Kelly were dropped into a TikTok age with a Wi-Fi password and a global platform, well, here you go. In an unprecedented PR move, Queen Rania took to YouTube to answer questions from the public about royal life. No scripts, no stiff collars. Just her, a camera, a lot of charisma, and the occasional tapioca pearl slurping into the mic. She chatted about education reform and Instagram rumors with the same tone most people reserve for brunch recaps. Her casual command of global influence made some traditionalists sweat. Royals, after all, are supposed to be mysterious, not relatable. But Rania made monarchy look accessible without ever diluting its edge. Designer dresses, sharp political insight, and bubble tea, she fused diplomacy with digital fluency. Her social media presence wasn't fluff. It was strategy, a queen with Wi-Fi and purpose. But if you think royal tech savvy is strange, just wait for the next queen who designed a star observatory shaped like a wine bottle because the stars spoke to her dreams. Queen Seondeok's stargazing wine bottle. Queen Sondeok of Silla, Korea, ruled with the mind of a scientist and the flair of a poet on psychedelics. When she wanted to observe the heavens, she didn't build a typical tower. She constructed Cheomseongdae, a stone observatory shaped like a giant bottle of rice wine. Apparently, astrology tastes better drunk. The structure was an architectural enigma. 27 layers of stones, one for each year of her reign, windows aligned with constellations, and a hollow interior that echoed whispers into the sky. She claimed the stars spoke to her in dreams, offering cryptic cosmic advice about harvests, invasions, and occasionally her hairstyle. Her court was equal parts inspired and terrified. Astrologers scribbled furiously trying to interpret her visions. Some say she once reversed a tax policy because Saturn appeared slightly offended. Others claim she predicted a solar eclipse 3 months in advance and threw a party for the sun's return. Seondeok ruled in a time when women weren't exactly encouraged to wield telescopes, much less build them. But she didn't just rule, she made the sky listen. And if listening to stars sounds strange, the next empress used a parrot to give imperial speeches during a case of royal laryngitis. Empress Theodora's parrot parliament. Empress Theodora of Byzantium had a problem. An empire to run and a voice that decided to take a vacation. Struck with laryngitis during a crucial stretch of governance, Theodora could have opted for silence and pity. Instead, she reached for a far more imperial solution, a trained parrot. Yes, when the empress couldn't speak, she had her speeches delivered by a bird. The parrot was reportedly taught to mimic her voice and deliver memorized lines. It squawked policies, it croaked commands, it possibly called people out by name. This was no idle pet. It was a feathery, bureaucratic megaphone. Imagine the spectacle. Ministers standing stiff while a brightly plumed creature screamed decrees like, "Raise taxes!" or "Move the troops!" while nibbling on pomegranate seeds. Theodora's court quickly learned 2 things. First, never underestimate a woman with a sore throat and an agenda. Second, don't interrupt the parrot. It bites. Her use of the bird wasn't just humorous, it was brilliant. She maintained control, terrified dissenters, and reminded everyone that losing her voice didn't mean losing her power. And if Favian authority seems over the top, wait until you hear about the queen who embroidered defeated kings' faces onto pillows and mailed them to their widows. Queen Tamar's pillow-faced peace treaties. Georgia's Queen Tamar wasn't one to let a military victory end without a personal touch. While most rulers settled for treaties and stiff formalities, Tamar preferred something softer, pillows. Specifically, embroidered ones featuring the faces of the kings she defeated. She mailed them to their widows as tokens of peace. Peace, yes, that was the word she used. These weren't hastily made cushions either. They were luxury objects, stitched with care, detail, and a dash of sarcasm. The widows received not just surrender terms, but bedtime accessories featuring their late husband's terrified expressions immortalized in thread. The royal equivalent of sleep on that. Tamar's move was half diplomacy, half psychological warfare. Her enemies never quite knew whether to laugh, weep, or declare war again. But war didn't work because she kept winning. She ruled with iron, silk, and a needle sharp enough to make Freud uncomfortable. Her court admired her precision. Her enemies feared her textile diplomacy. Even her monks probably kept their pillows zipped in storage. And if that sounds bizarre, brace yourself. The next empress banned Chinese characters and poetry because she dreamed they were stealing the moon. Empress Genmei's lunar language ban. In 8th century Japan, Empress Genmei woke from a dream so unsettling she turned it into national policy. In the dream, Chinese characters were stealing the moon, not metaphorically literally. The written symbols floated up into the sky like thieves and absconded with the moon's glow. The next morning, Genmei declared a poetry decree: no Chinese characters allowed. For an entire year, poets had to write in phonetic Japanese script only. Court scholars blinked. Scribes groaned. Poets wept. The imperial court was suddenly a very quiet place, filled with people trying to describe cherry blossoms without half their vocabulary. Was it paranoia? Poetic rebellion? Cosmic copyright enforcement? Historians still debate it. But Genmei stuck to her ban with the certainty of someone who had personally chased a kanji across the night sky. She believed that too much foreign influence could weaken Japan's spiritual fabric, and what better way to make that point than by accusing the alphabet of celestial theft? Under her rule, language became a battleground of the sacred, and everyone got writer's block. But if banning moon-thieving characters seems intense, just wait for the Swedish queen who cross-dressed, hated hats, and challenged a French ambassador to a duel over fashion. Queen Christina Duel walked in cross-dressing splendor. Queen Christina of Sweden didn't just bend the rules, she did cartwheels over them in breeches and boots. She dressed like a man, refused to marry, hated small talk, and once made a royal advisor cry by quoting philosophy at breakfast. But her crown jewel moment of sartorial rebellion? She challenged the French ambassador to a duel over his opinion on her hat. Yes, a diplomatic representative critiqued her headwear, and instead of responding with a polite cough or awkward silence, Christina went full musketeer. Pick your weapon. Step outside. Let's see who's really fashionable. No shots were fired, probably because someone talked her out of it, but the message was clear. Mess with her style, and you'll be bleeding compliments. Christina's gender presentation was only half the scandal. The other half? Her intellect. She invited Descartes to court. He promptly died, which wasn't her fault. Renounced her throne to move to Rome, converted to Catholicism, and started casually influencing European politics from her salon like a rogue philosopher in lace gloves. She was unpredictable, brilliant, and deeply uninterested in being anyone's idea of a lady. And if poisoning your fruit basket sounds like a more direct tactic, wait for the Korean queen who did exactly that to catch a traitor. Queen Min's fruit basket sting operation. Queen Min of Korea didn't just rule. She watched, from behind curtains, beneath veils, dressed as a maid. She was the type of ruler who could be in the room, and you'd never know until you suddenly found yourself exiled, fired, or violently uninvited to life. And her methods? Let's just say the CIA could have taken notes. When she suspected betrayal among her ministers, Queen Min launched a covert operation centered around fruit. She had an entire shipment of fruit poisoned lightly enough to sicken, fatally enough to expose, and then casually served it during a palace banquet. Anyone who refused the fruit got side-eyed. Anyone who ate it and keeled over. Bingo. The traitor list wrote itself. This was the same queen who once dressed in servant garb to spy on her own government. Gossipers, schemers, and overly confident courtiers found themselves talking freely around her, only to later discover they'd been monologuing to the monarch herself. Min ruled with a quiet intensity, clever, composed, and deadly. She didn't need to raise her voice. She had poisoned pears for that. And if espionage and aprons isn't enough, meet the queen who ruled 3 kingdoms while pretending to be just the help. Queen Margaret I. Monarch in disguise. Queen Margaret I of Denmark wasn't content with one throne. She took 3 Denmark, Norway, and Sweden and ruled them like a Scandinavian power octopus. But what made her style of rule truly bizarre? She did it all while pretending she was just a helpful lady in the background. Think of her as the world's most competent assistant manager who secretly owns the company. Margaret insisted that official documents refer to her as merely the helper and protector. Meanwhile, she dressed in armor, led councils, picked kings, and occasionally intimidated nobles by revealing she was wearing chainmail under her silk. Nothing says, "I'm in charge," like gleaming chest plates under a petticoat. Her subtlety was legendary. When male rulers flailed in diplomacy, she'd quietly advise until they were following her plan. She created the Kalmar Union, a Scandinavian alliance that lasted over a century and still had time to micromanage court fashion. Her power was all the more terrifying because it was deniable. You couldn't overthrow someone who wasn't even queen. So yes, Margaret played modest. But she was the chess master behind the throne. And if you thought that was weird, wait until you hear about the empress who claimed her cat was a prophet. Empress Wu Zetian and her prophetic cat. Empress Wu Zetian makes another appearance, and this time it's not poetry or spies, but prophecy and fur. When things got politically tense, which was always, Wu didn't call for priests or generals. She turned to her cat, a cat she claimed delivered prophecies from Guanyin, the goddess of mercy. This wasn't just a case of, my pet is special. Wu's cat had divine clearance. It reportedly purred in patterns she interpreted as messages, meowed when trouble brewed, and enjoyed gourmet meals that rivaled those of her ministers. Some claimed the feline's diet included imperial-grade fish, lotus blossoms, and possibly a few bribes disguised as treats. Naturally, the ministers were concerned. Not just because their lives were now influenced by a prophetic tabby, but because the empress seemed to genuinely believe it. She'd cancel meetings because the cat advised rest. She'd greenlight decrees because the whiskers twitched eastward. And woe to anyone who rolled their eyes the last guy who did mysteriously retired with a limp. It was peak Wu Zetian, blending spiritual legitimacy with theatrical absurdity and wrapping it all in absolute authority. But if you think feline prophecies are outlandish, wait until you meet the Egyptian queen who mailed her enemies camel urine-scented perfume. Queen Shajarat Dur's camel urine diplomacy. Egypt's Queen Shajarat al-Dur knew how to send a message specifically, one soaked in camel urine and bottled like Chanel No. 5. When it came to handling her enemies, she didn't bother with subtle threats. Instead, she had luxurious-looking perfume flasks filled with an unmistakable aroma of desert mammal revenge and sent them as gifts. The best part? She denied everything. Oh, that smell? How curious. Must be a packaging issue. Meanwhile, foreign dignitaries gagged politely while the queen smiled like nothing was wrong. It was insult by implication, warfare by fragrance. Shajarat al-Dur was the kind of ruler who could run a kingdom while trolling her rivals via mail, and she did. After her husband's death, she disguised her own rule by continuing to issue commands under his name, using a curtain to separate her from official business because the world wasn't ready to see a woman hold power. So she became power from the shadows. But when the veil dropped, she didn't flinch. She ruled openly and fiercely until politics turned bloody. Still, she left a legacy of scent-based sabotage that's hard to forget. Speaking of unforgettable, meet the Egyptian queen who wore a fake beard to confuse the gods into treating her like a king. Queen Hatshepsut's divine beard strategy. Queen Hatshepsut didn't want to be a king, she wanted to be the king. The Egyptian gods, however, were very picky about gender and titles. So Hatshepsut decided to pull off history's most stylish act of celestial catfishing. She commissioned statues of herself with a male chest and a royal beard. A fake one, of course woven and ceremonial, but worn like a badge of mythological legitimacy. To the gods, appearance was everything. If you looked like a pharaoh, you were a pharaoh. And Hatshepsut? She looked the part so well, even heaven got confused. Her statues showed her towering in masculine form, standing among the great kings of the Nile. Priests grumbled. Courtiers whispered, but nobody stopped her. She ruled with unmatched efficiency, launching expeditions, building temples, and overseeing economic reform like she was born with a crook and flail. And through it all, the beard remained. It wasn't just a symbol, it was armor against tradition, against doubters, against gods who couldn't read footnotes. Hatshepsut rewrote divine optics, one bearded sculpture at a time. And if you thought impersonating a man to dodge divine bias was genius, wait until you hear about the Empress who avoided assassination by pretending to be a harmless herbalist. Empress Dowager Xiaozhuang's herbalist disguise. When assassination attempts started becoming more regular than breakfast, Empress Dowager Xiaozhuang of the Qing dynasty didn't call for extra guards, she called for a makeover. Specifically, into a harmless-looking old lady with a basket of herbs. Imperial robes? Gone. Royal entourage? Dismissed. Suddenly, she was just a sweet little herbalist with an unsettling knowledge of poisons. This wasn't some costume party. Political tensions were high, and Xiaozhuang's position was precarious. Her enemies wanted her gone, and she knew it. So she vanished from court life and reappeared as a background character in her own story, blending into the palace like wallpaper with a medicine bag. Her genius wasn't just in hiding, it was in manipulation. She brewed teas for her political rivals. Love tea, she called it. Calming, soothing, just a little too relaxing. Some believe she used her potions to make enemies docile, pliable, or conveniently forgetful. Others whispered that she dosed herself to build immunity. Either way, no one questioned the tea lady until they realized she was running the empire from the kitchen. And if that's not dramatic enough, wait until you meet the queen who sent a monkey to steal British military secrets during colonial warfare. Queen Lakshmi Bai's espionage monkey. Queen Lakshmi Bai of Jhansi wasn't playing checkers during British colonial expansion, she was playing 4D monkey chess, as in actual monkey, trained for espionage. During wartime council meetings held by British officers, she allegedly deployed her pet monkey to slip into tents and steal confidential documents. No one suspected the fuzzy infiltrator. Who would? It was just a curious animal with excellent memory and a taste for revolution. This was no novelty act. Lakshmi Bai was one of the fiercest resistance leaders during the 1857 Indian Rebellion. She fought on horseback with her infant son strapped to her back, led armies, strategized like a general, and used animals as part of her tactical toolkit. British officers were baffled. Sensitive papers kept disappearing. Plans leaked. Every time they turned their backs, something important went missing and sometimes returned with a monkey's muddy paw print. Eventually, they figured it out. Too late, of course. The damage was done. Lakshmi Bai wasn't just a warrior queen, she was an innovator, turning motherhood, royal status, and animal companionship into tools of insurgent brilliance. And if a monkey spy sounds bold, you haven't heard about the Ethiopian empress who locked herself in a chapel for 40 days and survived on nothing but honey. Empress Menen Asfa's honey-fueled drought ritual. When Ethiopia faced a devastating drought, Empress Menen Asfa didn't gather scientists or build reservoirs. She walked into a chapel, locked the doors behind her, and declared she wouldn't come out for 40 days. Her only sustenance, honey. No water, no bread, just golden, sticky, bee-made persistence. This wasn't a hunger strike, it was a spiritual intervention. Menen believed the land needed purification. The heavens had gone silent, and someone had to shout into the void politely, of course, and preferably while fasting in royal silk. Palace officials panicked, advisors knocked. Priests offered alternative solutions. The Empress ignored them all. Inside, she prayed non-stop. Days passed. The kingdom buzzed with rumors. Was she alive? Had she gone mad? Would bees take over the throne? Then, on the 40th day, the skies opened. Rain fell. Crops sighed in relief. And Menen emerged, sticky but victorious like a saint dipped in molasses. Whether divine intervention or perfect timing, the people credited her with saving Ethiopia, and honey sales, they skyrocketed. Next up, meet the Indian queen who rejected the title queen altogether and made everyone call her sultan while wearing chainmail to court. Queen Razia Sultana wore chainmail to court. Razia Sultana didn't want the title queen. She wanted the title sultan, and she made sure everyone said it with emphasis. Ruling 13th century Delhi, Razia wasn't here for ornamental politics or embroidered power. She showed up to court in turban and chainmail, and if anyone got confused about her authority, she probably could have skewered them with a glare or her actual sword. She rode into battle. She presided over court matters like a hawk in armor. She refused to be cloistered, whispered about, or dressed up like a porcelain doll for political theater. Her outfits were not merely symbolic, they were functional. Razia wore boots, she wore iron, she wore the weight of centuries of male precedents and made it look like fashion. Her insistence on being addressed as Sultan wasn't ego, it was a calculated dismantling of norms. She knew exactly what she was doing, and the people knew too. Some admired her, others resented her, but no one ignored her. Razia didn't just rule a kingdom. She carved space where none was offered. And if reading the stars in armor sounds intense, wait until you meet the Empress who predicted earthquakes through cryptic children's poems. Empress Taimei's seismic poetry. Empress Taimei of Japan had a niche hobby, writing delicate little poems that accurately predicted earthquakes. She published them anonymously in children's newspapers, turning natural disaster forecasting into an eerie form of literary bedtime sabotage, somewhere between a haiku and a horror warning. The poem seemed harmless at first, gentle couplets about trembling leaves or restless fish, but then bam, the ground would shake days later. It didn't take long before readers realized that when Empress Taimei rhymed about shifting earth, you'd better secure the furniture. Was it intuition? Spiritual sensitivity? A really well-hidden scientific understanding of tectonic plates? We'll never know. Taimei wasn't exactly handing out geology lectures. She simply kept writing, quietly embedding prophecy into rhyme, like a seismic Dr. Seuss with imperial robes. Her advisors were baffled. Some dismissed it as coincidence. Others watched her stationary like it was a ticking clock. But the Empress never commented publicly. She didn't need to. Her words did the trembling for her. And if subliminal seismic warnings are unsettling, wait until you hear about the Yemeni queen who ruled from behind a golden screen while a man lip-synced her commands. Queen Arwa al-Sulaihi's Golden Screen Theater. Queen Arwa al-Sulaihi didn't believe in showing her face in court, but she also didn't believe in not ruling the entire country. So she split the difference. Behind a golden screen, she issued royal commands while her cousin stood in front of it and lip-synced her words. Imagine being a powerful male noble kneeling before what looks like an adult puppet show. You hear her voice, but it's coming from the mouth of a man dressed like a royal backup dancer. The cousin's job was pure choreography, match Arwa's inflection, time the lip movement, don't botch a decree about taxes or war. This was no comedy act. Arwa ran an efficient, expansive empire. Her legal reforms were sharp, her political instincts sharper. But she played the part of modest, veiled woman flawlessly. In public, she was unseen. In private, she was absolute. The screen wasn't a barrier, it was a throne. Her enemies underestimated her, until they didn't. By the time they realized she was the true voice of the state, her policies were already shaping law and history. And if you think mouthing orders through a cousin is wild, Wait until you meet the Empress who once served a concubine's flesh in a soup. Empress Lü Zhi's revenge soup. Empress Lü Zhi of the Han Dynasty didn't just hold grudges, she braised them. When she discovered that one of her husband's concubines had captured more than just his heart, Lü Zhi didn't respond with polite exile or palace intrigue. No, she responded with a culinary experience straight out of a horror anthology. Flesh soup. She reportedly had the concubine mutilated limbs removed, eyes gouged, tongue cut out, and then boiled parts of her into a meal. She served the resulting dish to her husband Emperor Gaozu with all the grace of a dutiful wife. After he'd finished eating, she revealed the recipe. He was not amused. Lü Zhi, however, was. This wasn't about jealousy, it was about dominance. She was staking her claim in blood and broth, sending a message no minister could misunderstand. She was not a woman to cross. Lü Zhi later ruled as regent and proved that her political ruthlessness extended far beyond her kitchen. The incident became palace legend, whispered among servants and scribes for generations. And if you think murder stew is the peak of moral collapse, just wait until you meet the queen who declared she was cleansing the land of lazy angels by burning down churches. Queen Gudit burned churches for a clean slate. Queen Gudit of Ethiopia didn't ease into her reign with minor reforms or gentle diplomacy. She grabbed a torch figuratively and literally and started burning churches. Why? Because, in her words, she was cleansing the land of lazy angels. Subtle, she was not. To her, the religious institutions had grown corrupt, bloated, and spiritually useless. So she lit them up like divine bonfires. Entire monasteries were razed, sacred texts turned to ash. Icons melted into eerie puddles of silence, and through it all, Gudit walked, unfazed, wielding holy destruction like a queen on a mission from a far less forgiving god. Was she mad? Righteous? Both? No one can say for sure, but what's certain is that she ruled with apocalyptic resolve. Her campaign of destruction broke dynasties, altered religious power structures, and reshaped Ethiopia's cultural memory. Historians still debate whether she was a hero of reform or a villain of zealotry. What remains is her legend, a woman who didn't just rebel against kings, but against angels themselves. And if holy arson wasn't strange enough, the next empress trained a parrot to deliver verbal smackdowns to her political enemies. Empress Dowager Cixi's insult parrot. Empress Dowager Cixi wasn't the type to raise her voice. She had a bird for that, specifically a parrot trained to deliver savage, personalized insults to her political enemies. When a minister annoyed her, she wouldn't scold him directly. Instead, her parrot would squawk something like, "Minister Li smells like betrayal," from its jewel-encrusted perch. And that perch wasn't just decorative, it was imperial real estate. The bird was awarded a miniature throne, possibly with a better seating arrangement than half the court. Servants fed it delicacies. Some say it had its own silk robes. The parrot didn't just mimic, it condemned, with flair. Ministers lived in fear of it. Rumor had it the bird once interrupted a speech by screaming, "He lies, he lies," directly at a general. Everyone froze. The general resigned the next day. Cixi just sipped her tea. It was absurd and brilliant. A weaponized echo chamber, delegated mockery. And it worked. No one could claim the empress was being improper after all. It was just the bird. And if using a parrot for psychological warfare feels extreme, wait until you meet the queen who wore a dress covered in tiny embroidered skulls to manage her anxiety. Queen Elizabeth I, skull dress of dread. Queen Elizabeth had nerves of steel and skin like porcelain. But even she had bad days. And on those days she reached for a very specific outfit, her death dress, not metaphorical, not goth metaphor. A literal gown embroidered with tiny skulls, hundreds of them. A wearable death threat to anyone who thought she looked tired. She wore it during times of royal anxiety when threats loomed, betrayals simmered, or Parliament got especially annoying. The dress said everything she didn't have to. I am the Virgin Queen. I have no heirs. I trust no one. Try me. Court gossip claimed it made her look like a walking cemetery wrapped in lace. She claimed it gave her clarity. The symbolism wasn't subtle. The skulls reminded everyone of mortality. Hers, theirs, the nation's. Wearing death as fashion was her way of embracing power through fragility of turning existential dread into aesthetic domination. She didn't just rule, she haunted the throne. In a court built on masks and myth, Elizabeth's death dress whispered truths no one else dared utter. And if you thought that was spooky, the next queen consulted lunar eclipses to determine national policy by channeling the wisdom of dead queens. Queen Salome, Alexandra's moonlit policy manual. Queen Salome Alexandra of ancient Judea didn't just study the stars, she took her advice from the dead queens who lived in the moon. According to her, lunar eclipses weren't just astronomical events. They were royal messages from the afterlife, glowing in the sky like divine post-its. Every time the moon went dark, Salome made policy changes. New tax rules? Check the sky. Military appointments? Better wait for that celestial consultation. Her advisors eventually got used to the ritual, the queen staring into the heavens while muttering things like, Miriam disapproves, or Athaliah says we need more grain reserves. Of course, no one could verify these messages, but no one dared challenge them either. Because the queen wasn't just spiritually connected, she was politically unshakable. Her reign was actually stable, prosperous, and unexpectedly enlightened. If dead queens were talking to her, they were giving great advice. Salome managed to make mysticism statecraft. Astrology turned into legislative calendar. Her court waited on moon cycles more faithfully than sunrise. And if governing by ghost moon sounds strange, wait until you meet the empress who held court in full denial, insisting the dead emperor was still alive, even when the body was missing. Empress Wei's invisible emperor charade. In the Tang dynasty, Empress Wei perfected political gaslighting centuries before it had a name. When the emperor died under suspiciously convenient circumstances, she refused to acknowledge his death. Not in private, not in public. Instead, she created the Invisible Court, a daily performance in which ministers gathered as if the emperor were still alive though his body had quietly vanished. They bowed to an empty throne. They offered reports to a ghost. They received orders spoken in his name, written by Wei. If anyone asked where His Majesty was, they were met with vague answers about spiritual contemplation or divine silence. Behind the scenes, Wei was pulling every string. She issued decrees from behind curtains. She punished those who hesitated to play along. The entire court became a theater of fear, where disbelief was treason and pretending was law. The truly chilling part? It worked, for a while. She kept up the performance long enough to consolidate power, rewrite alliances, and edge her way into absolute rule. And if you think pretending your dead husband is still in charge is cold, just wait until you meet the queen who trained wild elephants to race and only let the female ones win. Queen Rani Durgavati's elephant-only feminism. Rani Durgavati didn't just lead armies, she did it from the back of a charging elephant. But not just any elephant. It had to be female, always female. In fact, all her royal elephants were lady warriors. She trained them herself and then used them to race across palace grounds in events that blurred the line between military drill and feminist performance art. And it wasn't just for sport. These races were her screening process. She wanted elephants that were fast, fearless, and disinterested in male posturing. Males were banned from winning. Allegedly, she once halted an entire event when a male elephant surged ahead, refused to declare a winner, and restarted the race. Her officials learned the hard way. In Rani's court, if it didn't have tusks and ovaries, it wasn't crossing the finish line. This emphasis wasn't symbolic. It was strategic. Female elephants are known to be more stable in high-stress situations. Rani knew it and used it. Her elephant core was reliable, agile, and not easily distracted by testosterone-driven tantrums. Her rule was fierce and unorthodox, and her respect for feminine power extended to all corners of her court. Next up, a queen who took royal trolling to the next level by marrying a man dressed as a bride during peace talks just to mess with the Portuguese. Queen Jinga's bridal power move. Queen Nyinga of Ndongo and Matamba didn't just walk into peace negotiations, she owned them, literally. When she met with Portuguese colonizers to discuss terms, she noticed they hadn't bothered to provide a chair. They wanted her to stand, while the European men sat comfortably. Njinga looked around, grabbed a servant, and sat down on his back. That servant became a human throne, and the message was clear. I kneel for no one. But that was just the warm-up act. Later, to really cement her status and unnerve her enemies, she took a male concubine, dressed him as a bride, and married him. Yes, she wed a man in drag during a diplomatic summit. The Portuguese were visibly rattled. That was the point. In Jinga's court, political theater was warfare. Every detail, every costume, gesture, and seating arrangement was a psychological campaign. She ruled fiercely, traded alliances with cunning precision, and commanded armies against European invasion with all the elegance of a queen and the ruthlessness of a warlord. And if unsettling your enemies with gender-fluid wedding ceremonies isn't enough, wait until you meet the Japanese empress who published a best-selling cookbook under a fake name and got caught by her chopsticks. Empress Michiko's culinary alias and chopstick clue. Empress Michiko of Japan had a secret side hustle, best-selling author. But she wasn't writing royal memoirs or etiquette guides. No. She was publishing cookbooks under a fake name, ones that topped sales charts, inspired homemakers, and sparked a mini culinary movement, all anonymously. Her dishes were refined but approachable, blending imperial elegance with everyday comfort food. Recipes included thoughtful notes about flavor balance, family traditions, and the kind of quiet joy that only comes from perfect miso. But Michiko kept her identity hidden, insisting it was about the food, not the fame. Then came the slip-up. A published photo showed the recipe plated beside a pair of exquisitely carved chopsticks, imperial issue. The kind only a reigning empress would own. Readers started asking questions. The palace went silent, but the truth leaked, as truths often do when presented with photographic evidence and suspiciously poetic descriptions of rice preparation. Michiko never confirmed it outright, but the reveal only made the public love her more. Royalty writing recipes? Unthinkable. And yet, somehow perfect. And if secretly dominating the publishing industry wasn't enough, brace yourself for a queen who refused to change her underwear during a war because she believed her scent was divinely weaponized. Queen Isabella, eyes holy undergarments. Queen Isabella I of Spain took divine conviction to a level that can only be described as aromatic. During a military campaign, when her court politely suggested she change her undergarments, Isabella refused. Not out of laziness, defiance, or lack of fresh linens, no, she believed her scent was holy, a sacred aroma so potent it repelled enemy arrows. The logic? Simple. If God favored her, then even her body odor must radiate divine protection. Bathing might wash away that spiritual shield. And so, she remained unwashed throughout long campaigns, radiating faith and possibly mildew in equal measure. Her soldiers, inspired or maybe just stunned, followed her into battle. Miraculously, she won. Her odor became legend. Whether it actually stopped enemy fire or simply cleared the battlefield by olfactory force, we may never know. What's clear is that Isabella's version of armor included unlaundered piety. She wasn't eccentric for show. She believed in divine right, divine smell, and divine discomfort. And speaking of queens who believed in divine expression, meet the Hawaiian monarch who once held an entire council meeting through hula dance. Queen Lily, Uokalani's hula legislation session. Queen Lily Uokalani of Hawaii had a talent for turning politics into poetry and, sometimes, into choreography. During one particularly symbolic council session, she decided to forego speeches entirely and conducted the entire meeting through hula dance. You heard that right. National governance, interpreted through rhythm, sway, and sacred motion. Hula, of course, wasn't just a dance. It was language, history, resistance. In Lily Uokalani's hands, it became lawmaking with hips and hands. Every gesture carried meaning. Her ministers watched in stunned reverence as policy unfolded one movement at a time. It wasn't confusing if you knew the language of the land, and she did flawlessly. As the composer of over 150 songs, she viewed communication as a layered art form. Words, melody, movement tools of rule as legitimate as any Western decree. Her reign, increasingly threatened by colonial powers, responded not with violence but with cultural authority. She used hula not just to preserve heritage, but to govern with it. It was beautiful, defiant, heartbreaking. And if that sounds bold, the next empress used mirrors not to reflect beauty but to blind foreign ambassadors she didn't like. Empress Myeongseong's mirror defense strategy. Back again for an encore of defiance and strategy. Empress Myeongseong of Korea, yes, the one with the hairpin codes, had a new tactic in her political playbook. Weaponized mirrors. When certain foreign ambassadors showed up, especially the smug ones, she'd arrange for mirrors to be strategically placed around the room, angling them just so to catch the sunlight. The result? Blinding beams of light directed straight into the eyes of her diplomatic guests. Imagine showing up to negotiate trade and instead being slowly roasted by the wrath of geometry and sunlight. And when asked, Myeongseong would simply tilt her head and say, "Oh, must be the sun's natural favor." She didn't trust these men. Many were colonizers in suits, hiding aggression behind tea and diplomacy, and she made sure they knew they were not in control, not even of their own vision. Her court glowed with mirrors, prisms, and quiet warnings. It wasn't just a petty prank. It was a power play. Subtle, undeniable. The queen was watching, and so was the light. And speaking of queens unafraid of scandal, next is the one who wrote to a foreign enemy king asking to marry his son, while her court gasped in horror. Queen Ankhesenamun's marriage proposal to the enemy. Queen Ankhesenamun of Egypt broke every rule of royal diplomacy when she wrote a letter that could have burned down her entire dynasty. After the mysterious death of her young husband, King Tutankhamun, she found herself trapped. No heir, no powerful protector, and surrounded by vultures in linen. So what did she do? She wrote to the enemy. Specifically, she contacted the king of the Hittites, Egypt's geopolitical rival, and requested something unthinkable. Send me one of your sons to marry. I'll make him pharaoh. That's like the Queen of England inviting Napoleon to tea and offering him Buckingham. Treason? Genius? Desperation? Probably all three. The letter caused panic in the Egyptian court. Foreign marriage? A foreign king on the throne? Unacceptable. The Hittites, shocked but intrigued, sent a prince who was promptly murdered on his way to Egypt. Suspicious? Very? Subtle? Absolutely not. Ankh-Senamun disappears from history shortly after, possibly erased by those she'd threatened with her proposal. But her letter survived, carved into clay. It remains one of the boldest and most cryptic diplomatic Hail Marys in ancient history. And if royal romance by enemy post wasn't enough, the next queen was buried with a secret stash, a servant's hair, a forbidden photo, and her dead husband's robe. Queen Victoria's forbidden funeral keepsakes. Queen Victoria may have ruled over the British Empire like a granite monument in mourning, but when she died, her burial arrangements revealed something far softer and far stranger. Inside her coffin, tucked between royal trappings, were 3 banned items: a lock of hair, a photograph, and her dead husband's dressing gown. But the hair and photo weren't Albert's, they belonged to her servant, John Brown. John Brown was her closest companion after Prince Albert's death. Their relationship scandalized the court. He was Scottish, gruff, and not of noble birth. But Victoria adored him. They shared jokes, secrets, and according to rumors, a deep, possibly romantic bond that made ministers very uncomfortable. So when it came time for her burial, she ignored every protocol. She had Albert's robe laid beside her, but in her hand, John Brown's photo. In her other, a lock of his hair. It was a quiet rebellion against aristocratic constraints, a last act of intimacy in a world obsessed with appearances. The royal undertakers swore secrecy, but the truth eventually slipped out. And speaking of secrets, the next empress kept a diary written entirely in French and filled it with imaginary conversations with Napoleon. Empress Shoken's French diary, an imaginary Napoleon. Empress Shoken of Japan, refined and reserved, had a secret world hidden inside her writing desk. Among scrolls and ceremonial documents was a diary written entirely in classical French, which, on its own, is already impressive, but it gets better. The diary featured page after page of imagined conversations with one recurring guest, Napoleon Bonaparte. Yes, the Empress of Japan had an ongoing written dialogue with a dead European emperor. She'd ask his advice on politics, poetry, even outfits. Would this kimono impress your court? She might muse. Should I allow the finance minister to resign? Her imaginary Napoleon answered with florid encouragement and the occasional tactical musing. No one knew about the diary until after her death. When court historians discovered it, they were baffled. Was it satire? Was she practicing diplomacy through fan fiction? Or was it the most elegant act of escapism ever penned in imperial ink? Whatever the reason, Empress Shoken maintained her composure in public while secretly spilling her soul to a ghost in epaulettes. And if that sounds eccentric, wait until you hear about the queen who tested poisons on prisoners and timed their deaths on a scroll called Breath of the Moon. Queen Cleopatra VII's poison portfolio. Cleopatra VII wasn't just a seductress or political chess master. She was also a part-time toxicologist with a flair for dramatic documentation. Behind the eyeliner, asp rumors, and Roman entanglements was a queen deeply fascinated by the mechanics of death, So much so, she reportedly tested poisons on prisoners. Not out of boredom, but research. She wanted to know what worked fastest, what caused the least pain, and this is the poetic part, how beautifully the victim died. Each test was meticulously recorded in a scroll titled Breath of the Moon. Picture a glittering papyrus death diary, noting things like hemlock slow, uglifies the face, number, or opium plus snake, venom combo, dignified. Prisoners were paraded in, poisons administered, and Cleopatra stood by with the solemn air of a scientist documenting sunsets. She wasn't cruel, at least not in her own mind. She was searching for something elegant, painless, efficient. A queen's death should reflect her poise. And in the end, she used this research to orchestrate her own departure, though which method she chose remains a mystery. Some say it was an asp. Others believe it was carefully measured toxin chosen from her very own moonlit poison catalog. And speaking of stylish vengeance, let's meet the queen who filled her rival's bed with live crickets. Queen Blanche of Castile's cricket haunting. Queen Blanche of Castile didn't assassinate her rivals, she inconvenienced them to death. One such case involved an especially elegant revenge tactic. Crickets, lots of them. Live, noisy, sleep-destroying crickets released directly into her rival's bedchamber. The queen's nemesis, a noblewoman who had spread scandalous rumors, was found the next morning pale, shaking, and half-mad from a night of chirping insect terror. And when she confronted Blanche, the queen simply smiled and said, "Perhaps your conscience was noisy." But Blanche wasn't finished. She escalated things by suggesting, publicly, that the woman was haunted. A formal inquiry was launched. Priests were consulted. No one could find a ghost, but they did find cricket droppings. The noblewoman was disgraced, declared spiritually unsound, and quietly removed from court. Blanche's reputation for icy precision only grew. She governed France with a velvet glove wrapped around a steel dagger and apparently a cricket jar. Her enemies never quite knew how they'd fall. Assassination? Scandal? Or a bed full of bugs? She preferred subtle sabotage over brute force. But if you think chirping insects are bad, wait until you hear about the emperor who made losing poets hop on one leg while reciting verses backwards. Empress Wu Zetian's poetic torture games. Ah yes, Wu Zetian again, because one appearance just isn't enough for a woman who turned the imperial court into an ongoing reality show hosted by Wrath. Among her many talents was throwing elaborate poetry contests. But there was a catch. Losing came with humiliation. Specifically, losers had to hop on one leg while reciting their verses backward, in front of the court, wearing scholar robes, possibly crying. Wu didn't just want victory, she wanted humiliation as entertainment. Think of it as open mic night meets medieval hazing ritual. Judges weren't impartial either. They were carefully chosen sycophants who knew exactly whose verse should win. Wu's own poetry, admittedly impressive, always ranked first. Her enemies never got past the semifinals without being turned into hopping parodies of themselves. The court, of course, laughed. They had to. You try not laughing when the guy who just voted against your land grant is leaping around, shouting backward Tang rhymes and trying not to trip on his dignity. It was psychological warfare in couplets, a way to silence dissent not with swords, but with stanzas. And next comes a queen who didn't bother with verse, she just murdered a Roman ambassador and mailed back his teeth. Queen Tuta's dental diplomacy. Queen Tuta of Illyria had a strict no-nonsense policy when it came to foreign interference, especially when that interference showed up in the form of a smug Roman ambassador wagging his diplomatic finger in her face. Rome, trying to assert control over Illyrian piracy, sent their envoy to negotiate. Tuta listened politely, smiled, and then had him murdered. But she wasn't done. She gathered his teeth, yes, his literal teeth, and mailed them back to Rome in a tidy little parcel. No note needed. The message was clear. Don't tell a queen how to run her coastline. Illyria might have been small, but Tuta's brand of international relations made sure no one underestimated her twice. Rome, of course, did not appreciate the toothy retort. They sent legions. But Tuta, unfazed, held out with cunning and guerrilla warfare, earning a reputation as one of the Mediterranean's fiercest and most unapologetic leaders. She knew she couldn't outmuscle an empire, so she went for shock value. Sending molars as political statements may not have been standard protocol, but it certainly made her unforgettable. And if you think that's an escape act, wait until you meet the Empress who literally vanished into the snow wearing only a white cloak. Empress Matilda's snow-cloaked escape. Empress Matilda of England didn't just survive betrayal, she turned it into a disappearing act worthy of legend. Trapped in Oxford Castle during a brutal siege, surrounded by enemy forces and starving troops, Matilda faced certain capture, but instead of surrendering, she waited for the perfect night, a snowstorm. Dressed head to toe in white cloak, boots, gloves, everything, she and a handful of loyal followers slipped out of the castle and vanished into the blizzard. They crossed the frozen River Thames in silence, trudging miles through knee-deep snow, while guards peered uselessly into a world of whiteness. It was escape by camouflage 19th century stealth mode. By dawn, she was gone. Her enemies were humiliated, and Matilda had secured her place as the winter ghost of English legend. She didn't just survive, she embarrassed everyone who doubted her. Her reign was turbulent, her path to power riddled with conflict, but moments like this cemented her as a cunning survivor in a world where women were expected to quietly fail. And speaking of legendary escapes, next is the warrior queen who marched into Egypt, killed a Roman governor, and buried his head in a temple floor. Queen Amanirenas, and the buried Roman head. Queen Amanirenas of Nubia didn't send letters or gifts. She sent a message in the form of a severed Roman head. When Augustus tried to expand his empire southward into Nubia, Amanirenas met the threat not with negotiations but with spears and elephants. She led her troops into Egypt, captured Roman garrisons, and returned home with trophies. One of those trophies? The head of a Roman governor, likely still fuming with imperial entitlement. She didn't keep it on a shelf or mount it on a wall. No, she buried it in the floor of a temple. The symbolism couldn't have been clearer. Rome bows to Nubia. Amanirenas was blind in one eye, but she didn't need depth perception to see through colonial arrogance. She waged a brutal but strategic campaign, defending her people and their sovereignty with ferocity and brilliance. Rome eventually agreed to peace on her terms. In a world where most queens were fighting to stay relevant, Amanirenas went on the offensive. And if burying heads in holy floors wasn't dramatic enough, next comes the queen who outlawed mirrors for men, declaring that vanity was strictly a royal duty. Queen Tamar outlawed mirrors for men only. Yes, again Queen Tamar of Georgia, and this time with a decree that made every nobleman in the kingdom rethink his morning routine. Tamar officially outlawed mirrors for men not because of superstition or shortages, but because, in her words, vanity is the duty of queens alone. The logic: men didn't need to admire themselves. That was Tamar's domain, to look glorious, rule gloriously, and reflect gloriously while doing it. If a duke needed to check his hair, he was welcome to find a puddle. Her court decrees didn't mince words. A polished surface in male quarters could be seized as contraband. Some say the law came after she caught a nobleman admiring his own cheekbones for too long. Others suspect it was a power move diverting all attention, admiration, and awe to the crown. Either way, it worked. Mirrors vanished. Makeup smugglers emerged. Ministers wore hats all day because they couldn't see if their hair was tragic. Tamar's blend of dominance and dry wit made even the most absurd laws sound profound. But if banning male reflection sounds petty, wait until you meet the Empress who believed muddy, barefoot rituals could cleanse the sky of divine punishment, Empress Kogyoku's mud cleansing ceremonies. Empress Kogyoku of Japan didn't fear rainstorms, she feared what caused them. To her, violent weather wasn't meteorology. It was punishment from the heavens for something she, or someone near her, had clearly done wrong. And so, when the sky cracked open, Kogyoku didn't hide. She went outside barefoot. Her court followed in stunned silence as she conducted barefoot ceremonies in the pouring rain, standing ankle-deep in mud and praying aloud to the elements. She believed these rituals cleansed the heavens, a sort of spiritual apology note scrawled in squelching steps and sodden silk. Servants wept, ministers slipped, priests blessed every puddle. But Kogyoku stood firm, wet hair plastered to her face, as if daring the gods to strike her again. According to records, she occasionally performed these rites in the dead of night, with only torches and frogs as her witnesses. Did it work? Who knows? But after every ceremony, she declared the storm forgiven. That's queen logic. And if eating humble pie in the mud seems odd, next is the queen who refused to eat wheat altogether because it made her brain too lazy. Instead, she dined on figs, snow, water, and roasted locusts. Queen Zenobia's anti-wheat diet. Queen Zenobia of Palmyra didn't trust bread, not because of gluten, but because she believed wheat made your brain lazy. Yes, lazy, foggy, weak. And that simply wouldn't do for the woman who planned military campaigns over breakfast. So she cut wheat entirely from her diet and built her meals around what she called pure fuels of the intellect: figs, snow, water, and roasted locusts. It wasn't a fad, it was doctrine. Snow water was collected from mountaintops, stored in silver and served chilled. The figs were dried under specific constellations. The locusts? Hand-picked, seasoned, and toasted until crispy. She claimed their protein sharpened her memory and, frankly, intimidated her rivals. Zenobia's intelligence was legendary, fluent in several languages, a fierce negotiator, and a ruler who carved an empire out of Roman territory without flinching. Whether her diet truly fueled genius or just terrified Roman diplomats into submission, one thing's certain: it became part of her legend. While Caesar was snacking on grapes, Zenobia was crunching bugs and reading Greek philosophy. And if you think squirrel skull charms can't beat that, just wait for the queen who went to battle painted blue, armed with a rodent skull of luck. Queen Boudica's blue war, paint and squirrel skull. Queen Boudica of Britain didn't go to war quietly. She went to war, painted blue, shrieking battle cries across the countryside, and armed with a weapon that would make modern generals raise an eyebrow: a squirrel skull. Not for clubbing, for luck. Tied to her belt or held in her fist, depending on how much divine favor she needed that day. To Boudica, the skull was sacred. It channeled the spirits of the forest, the rage of her ancestors, and probably the manic twitchiness of its original owner. She smeared herself in woad, a natural blue dye, turning her body into a canvas of tribal fury. The Romans, faced with this howling cobalt-streaked queen and her skeletal charm, reportedly panicked. Who wouldn't? She led a full-blown uprising against Roman rule, burned entire cities to the ground, and nearly toppled the imperial grip on Britain. Her campaign wasn't subtle, it was vengeance on wheels, and the squirrel skull was her chosen talisman of chaos. To Boudica, war was personal, primal, and sacred. And if blue war paint and rodent relics don't unnerve you, next is the Empress who discovered silk by accident and kept it a national secret under threat of worm exile. Empress Leizu's Worm Silk Secret Service. Empress Leizu of ancient China was sipping tea beneath a mulberry tree when something odd happened. A cocoon fell into her cup and began to unravel. Instead of screaming or asking for another pot, Leizu stared entranced as the delicate thread kept unwinding long, smooth, perfect. Silk had been discovered, and Leizu wasn't about to share. She immediately claimed it for China, and what followed was one of the most successful and paranoid intelligence operations in history. Silk production became an imperial secret. Silkworms were treated like divine assets, and anyone caught smuggling them out of the empire, exiled, or worse. Leizu oversaw the beginning of an industry that would fund dynasties, build trade routes, and inspire global obsession. But she also built the mythos that silk was more than luxury, it was sacred. Girls raised silkworms in silence. Farmers whispered around mulberry trees. Officials passed laws banning even discussion of worms near foreigners. Silk wasn't just a product, it was a national mystery. And if worms in teacups sound delicate, wait for the Bhutanese queen, who showed up to a royal wedding riding a yak and demanded the vows be sung in throat singing. Queen Gyaltsuen rode a yak to the altar. Queen Gyaltsuen of Bhutan didn't do subtle entrances. When it came time to attend a royal wedding, not even her own, she didn't arrive in a sedan chair, limousine, or gilded procession. She rode in on a yak, covered in silk, adorned with prayer flags, and possibly chewing something ominous. The yak was majestic, and she was even more so. The wedding was a lavish affair, but Gyaltsuen decided it needed more authenticity. She insisted the vows be sung, not recited in throat, singing a guttural, ancient sound that echoed across the Himalayan hills like the mountains themselves were blessing the union. Guests were stunned. Courtiers scrambled to find monks with the right vocal range, but no one dared say no. When a queen shows up on a yak and makes musical demands, you simply adjust the program. The ceremony became part opera, part spiritual experience, part fever dream. And the bride and groom? Probably too awestruck to object. Gyaltsuen's dramatic flair was always paired with grace, making her a symbol of strength wrapped in silk and yak hair. And if you think yaks at weddings are odd, just wait until you meet the Indian queen who refused to sit on a throne unless it was blessed by a monkey. Queen Kangana's monkey-blessed throne. Queen Kangana of India had one very specific, very non-negotiable requirement before occupying any throne. It had to be blessed by a monkey, not priests, not sages' monkeys. If it didn't have the approval of a wild, furry, tail-swinging arbiter of fate, it simply wasn't fit for royal use. Before official events, her attendants would coax a monkey, preferably one with a serene aura, into the hall, guide it toward the throne, and watch anxiously to see whether it would touch, sit on, or ignore the seat. If the monkey passed judgment, Kangana would sit. If the monkey refused, ceremony canceled. The guests could stare at an empty chair for all she cared. Some dismissed it as eccentricity. Others believed she had formed a spiritual pact with Hanuman, the monkey god, and treated his animal descendants as divine inspectors. Either way, the ritual became palace routine. Monkeys were fed better than ministers, and thrones were less about power, more about primate approval. It sounds bizarre until you realize how effectively it filtered out bad luck and possibly assassins. And speaking of ruthless clarity, wait until you meet the Empress who had her own son blinded and then painted herself reunited with him in holy light. Empress Irene's blinding betrayal and painted redemption. Empress Irene of Byzantium really redefined helicopter parenting. When her adult son started getting too independent, and by independent, we mean trying to take the throne, she liked keeping warm. She did what any deeply devout and terrifying mother would do, had him blinded. This wasn't metaphorical, he can't see the truth blinding. This was literally send in the palace goons and take his eyes blinding. With her son now unfit to rule, Irene seized power for herself and declared that she alone would restore order to the empire, because nothing says, "I love you," quite like ocular mutilation and a solo coronation. But Irene wasn't just brutal. She was theatrical. After assuming total control, she commissioned religious paintings, icons of her and her son, not as rivals but as celestial figures reunited in divine light. The son she just maimed was now her co-star in Byzantine spiritual propaganda. Some even say she tried to canonize the moment. Historians still argue whether it was power, hunger, maternal madness, or sincere religious conviction, possibly all three. But if Byzantine horror shows aren't your style, how about a British queen who pierced her belly button with a royal seal to ward off nightmares? Queen Caroline of Ansbach's Royal Naval Talisman. Queen Caroline of Ansbach had a lot on her royal plate: political tension, court gossip, raising monarchs in training, but when it came to personal safety, she had a very specific method. She pierced her belly button with a custom royal seal and claimed it protected her from nightmares. The seal was reportedly small, gold, and engraved with sacred symbols blessed by court alchemists and astrologers alike. It was less jewelry, more talisman, and Caroline took it seriously. She insisted it locked her dreams, preventing night terrors, demonic visitations, and, presumably, embarrassing subconscious metaphors. Her maids were baffled. Her doctors were skeptical. Her ministers were too afraid to ask. But the queen slept peacefully, and that was what mattered. As long as the seal remained embedded, she claimed, no nightmare could reach her. This royal body mod may have been ahead of its time, blending mysticism, fashion, and mild pain tolerance into one gilded ritual. She wore royal power not just on her crown, but under her corset. And if you think that's surreal, the next queen was rumored to have goat feet which she covered with golden slippers, even in the desert. Queen Bilqis of Sheba and the golden goat slippers. Queen Bilqis, better known as the Queen of Sheba, ruled with splendor, cunning, and a fashion sense that came with hooves. According to legend whispered in courts, scriptures, and scandalous pillow talk, Bilqis was not entirely human. She was rumored to have goat feet, hooved, cloven, biblical chic. Of course, the queen didn't confirm this. She didn't have to. She simply wore golden slippers at all times. Not just for ceremonies or royal portraits, but for everything: desert treks, diplomatic meetings, even private strolls. Always those dazzling, perfectly shaped slippers, like she was hiding a dark fairy tale beneath her hem. Some believed her condition was divine, a sign of celestial origin. Others said it was punishment for ambition. Bilqis herself remained serenely silent, which only deepened the mystery. Even King Solomon reportedly tried to get her to lift her skirts purely for theological reasons. Of course, she declined. Whether the goatfoot rumor was true or just political sabotage dressed up as folklore, Bilqis leaned into it. She turned speculation into allure, mystery into power. And if golden-hooved royalty wasn't surreal enough, next comes the Empress who built a library written entirely in animal blood on bamboo scrolls. Empress Dowager Bou's Bloody Bamboo Library. Empress Dowager Bo of the Han Dynasty didn't want an ordinary library. No dusty scrolls, no recycled parchment. She wanted something alive. So she commissioned an entire archive written in animal blood inked onto bamboo scrolls. Why? Because she believed it made the stories more vivid, the laws more binding, and the philosophy more visceral. The scrolls were stored in lacquered chests, protected from sunlight, and read aloud only under moonlight because sunlight, she claimed, bleaches truth. Scholars were carefully trained in how to unroll, read, and not faint from the scent. Anyone who dropped one had to fast for 3 days and copy Confucius by hand. The texts covered everything: family lineage, imperial edicts, herbal remedies, and morality tales soaked in symbolism and, well, hemoglobin. It was a private library, but word of its existence spread. Nobles feared being written into it. Ministers worried their names were already there. Whether it was intimidation, eccentric spirituality, or just an early form of psychological horror, Empress Bo made her point. Knowledge isn't power unless it has bite. And speaking of sharp claws and shadowy elegance, up next is the queen who insisted on being painted with cats, and only cats. Queen Emma of Normandy and the feline court portraits. Queen Emma of Normandy was a political heavyweight who married not one but 2 kings, Ethelred the Unready and Canute the Great, but her real legacy? Cats. Specifically, her unbreakable insistence that in every royal portrait she be surrounded by cats, dozens of them, painted, posed, lounging, lurking. Whiskers were a non-negotiable part of her public image. She claimed cats symbolized independence, cunning, and divine femininity, and also, probably, that they looked better than most courtiers. Artists were ordered to position them with reverence. If a feline looked bored or unflattering in the sketch, the entire canvas was scrapped. This wasn't just eccentricity. It was branding. The message was clear. I am untouchable, aloof, and adored. And if that wasn't enough, some claimed Emma held royal audiences with an actual cat in her lap, purring gently, while she signed treaties and sentenced nobles. Her feline fixation became court fashion. Ladies wore cat brooches. Men tried, and failed, to gift her exotic kittens. She remained unmoved. And if being immortalized in fur wasn't dramatic enough, wait for the empress who once held court atop a mechanical lion, just to make sure no one forgot who was boss. Empress Wu Zetian rode a mechanical lion to court. When Empress Wu Zetian wanted to make an entrance, she didn't just glide into the throne room like a regular ruler. She rode in on a mechanical lion. Yes, a giant, roaring, gear-clicking, intimidating piece of imperial theater that moved, snarled, and reminded everyone that she was, in fact, not to be trifled with. The lion was reportedly built with a system of hidden pulleys, wheels, and servants working behind curtains, but no one talked about that part. Because when the lion rolled in and Wu sat poised upon it, bathed in candlelight and seething authority, even the most hardened ministers suddenly remembered to bow extra low. It wasn't just spectacle, it was strategy. In a court filled with backstabbers, sycophants, and very nervous eunuchs, Wu's message was clear. I command beasts, steel, and fear. You're just trying not to sweat through your robes. Every mechanical growl echoed through the marble halls like a reminder of her absolute calculated power. And if steampunk thrones aren't strange enough, brace yourself. The next queen refused to sit on any furniture, unless it had been blessed by a ghost, cleansing prayer. Queen Gyeonghwa's haunted furniture paranoia. Queen Gyeonghwa of Korea had one very specific domestic rule. Never sit in a chair unless it had been blessed. Why? Because she believed her palace furniture was haunted. Not metaphorically haunted, actually haunted by ghosts, spirits, and bad energy. Each morning, royal servants would walk ahead of her into every room, whispering protective mantras over each surface. Chairs, cushions, divans, even ceremonial rugs, everything had to be spiritually wiped down before Her Majesty approached. If they skipped a step, Gyeonghwa would freeze in the doorway and wait. No blessing, no sitting, no exceptions. Some claimed this paranoia began after she sat on a supposedly cursed bench and had terrible dreams for a week. Others believed she had the second sight, a psychic sensitivity to restless spirits who dwelled in upholstery. Either way, the palace soon resembled a hybrid of royal residence and ghost exorcism center. Her advisors tried to reason with her. She ignored them. Ghosts, she insisted, hated unblessed furniture, and no throne was worth spiritual possession. Speaking of lavish obsessions, next is the Empress who loved ice sculptures so much she stockpiled frozen blocks year-round just to decorate her summer palace. Empress Xiao's ice-covered summer palace. Empress Xiao of the Liao dynasty didn't believe in seasons, she believed in ice. Specifically, massive, shimmering sculptures of it that turned her summer palace into an Arctic dreamscape. While everyone else was fanning themselves in silk and begging the heavens for breeze, Xiao was hosting tea ceremonies beside melting phoenixes. She commissioned giant frozen lotus flowers, crystalline dragons, and glacial towers that shimmered under candlelight. The secret? Ice blocks harvested in winter, stored in deep underground cellars, and guarded like national treasure until summer's peak. Servants were assigned to maintain them, mist them, and replace anything that dripped too dramatically. Visitors would step into her chambers and gasp not just from the chill, but from the absurdity. It was 100 degrees outside. Inside, icy wonderland. The contrast was surreal, and that was the point. For Empress Xiao, beauty was about control over nature, heat, time. If summer refused to cool down, she'd build her own winter, with flair. And if you think hosting parties in a frozen flower fortress is strange, wait until you meet the Ocean Queen who sent international treaties by turtle shell. Queen Mu Moy's Turtle Treaty Diplomacy. Queen Mu Moy of Oceania didn't believe in parchment, pigeons, or messengers with sweaty scrolls. When it came time to deliver a treaty, she used sea turtles. Not carved into their shells, she wasn't a monster, but strapped gently with ceremonial cords and etched shell plates engraved with her commands. The turtles were then released into the tides with precision and prayer. According to her court, the turtles always found their way. Villages across the islands would look out to sea and like clockwork spot a gleaming shell bobbing toward shore. Inside, royal decrees, peace offerings, or diplomatic ultimatums. Occasionally, snacks. Mu Moy wasn't just sending messages, she was sending statements. Nature was her courier. The ocean was her inbox. Anyone could send a horseman. Only Mu Moy used reptiles with built-in GPS and divine symbolism. Some thought she was mad, others thought she was brilliant. But no one ignored a treaty carried by a turtle. It meant the Queen of the Waves was watching. And if you think that's unhinged ingenuity, wait until you meet the Indian queen who consulted her earrings before making political decisions because they whispered advice. Queen Mangamal's whispering earrings. Queen Mangamal of India wasn't just well-dressed, she was well-informed, thanks to her earrings. Not decorative, not sentimental, but advisory. According to her, the gems embedded in her lobes were tuned to the political ether. And if she listened closely, they spoke to her. She consulted them before council meetings, before decrees, before breakfast. If one dangled slightly heavier than the other, it was a sign. If they sparkled a certain way in torchlight, that meant Delay the tax bill. Ministers waited in awkward silence while she leaned her head, listening intently to her left earlobe. Some claimed she even responded aloud. Were they enchanted, or just elaborate cover for intuition and inner monologue? No one knew, but no advisor dared contradict the earrings. They were treated as part of the cabinet. Mangamal was sharp, strategic, and undefeated in debate, possibly because no one wanted to argue with jewelry that predicted troop movements. She ruled efficiently, passing laws and building roads with a clarity that made her court question their own accessory choices. And if psychic earrings don't rattle you, the next empress banned clocks because she believed time should be owned, not counted. Empress Menen's clockless empire. Empress Menen of Ethiopia didn't just question time, she rejected it. In her palace, clocks were banned. No ticking, no talking, no hourly chimes cutting through the air. Why? Because, she said, time should be owned, not counted. And she meant it. Sundials were tolerated barely. Water clocks were smashed. Mechanical timepieces seized and melted. Even pocket watches had to be surrendered at the palace gates. If a guest wanted to know the time, they had to ask a servant trained to give answers like, "Between the songs of the second bird," or "When the eastern window brightens." Menen believed time was a colonial weapon, an imported tyranny that imposed artificial rhythm on sacred space. In her domain, people moved according to light, instinct, and royal mood. Meetings started when readiness ripened. Meals were served as hunger blooms. At first, foreign dignitaries mocked it. Then, they waited, and waited, and slowly realized that they had no control. Not over her schedule, not over their own. In Menen's Ethiopia, time bowed to the empress, not the other way around. And if that temporal rebellion seems dramatic, next up is the queen who wore lion-skin slippers to enhance her dreams and claimed they smelled like courage. Queen Hatshepsut's lion-scented dream slippers. Queen Hatshepsut of Egypt, already known for wearing a royal beard and rewriting the rules of gendered rule, had one final fashion quirk that screamed divine surrealism: lion skin slippers. Not decorative faux fur knockoffs, actual tanned lion hide tailored into regal house shoes she wore during sacred rituals and dream incubation ceremonies. When asked why, she allegedly replied, "They smell like courage." Which, depending on your olfactory expectations, is either poetic or deeply unsettling. But to Hatshepsut, the logic was sound. Lions were symbols of strength, command, and predatory majesty. Wearing their hide on her feet grounded her in those qualities and, she claimed, amplified her dreams. According to palace gossip, the dreams came sharper when the slippers were fresh. She made critical state decisions based on nocturnal visions, claiming the lion's spirit whispered guidance as she slept. Ministers began watching her footwear the way farmers watch clouds if the slippers were out. Something big was coming. This wasn't just royal eccentricity. It was dreamcraft diplomacy. A nightly communion between queen and beast. But if whispering leather doesn't impress you, wait for the empress who claimed her hair comb controlled lightning and held thunderstorm seances in absolute silence. Empress Keiko's lightning comb and thunder rituals. Empress Keiko of Japan wasn't just connected to the heavens, she was allegedly plugged in. According to palace legend, her hair comb didn't just untangle strands, it controlled lightning. During storms, she would sit by open windows, holding the comb aloft, demanding silence so she could listen to the crown. Servants scurried, courtiers froze. When thunder rumbled, she would nod solemnly, as if decoding divine Morse code. She claimed her comb had been forged from sacred iron struck by a meteor, gifted by the mountain spirits and enchanted by ancient shrine maidens. Or maybe she made that up, hard to say. But during her reign, lightning strikes near the palace became strangely common. Some took it as proof of her divine connection. Others just learned to walk very quietly during rainstorms. She once canceled a council meeting because the storm is not done speaking, and everyone naturally complied. Keiko didn't scream for power, she summoned it from the sky. And if her meteor-powered hairstyling tool isn't mystical enough, the next queen refused to eat anything unless it was arranged in floral shapes and consumed using tweezers. Queen Banu Begum's garden plate rituals. Queen Banu Begum of the Mughal Empire didn't eat meals, she curated botanical experiences. Every dish served to her had to be arranged in the shape of flowers, not just vaguely floral. She required tulip curry, lotus biryani, rose-shaped rice towers, and if a petal looked crooked, back to the kitchen. She believed food shaped like nature was more harmonious to the body and spirit. It aligned digestion with aesthetics. She also refused to eat with her hands or standard utensils. Instead, she used long, delicate tweezers plucking grains one by one, like a monarch practicing edible calligraphy. Meals could take hours. Servants held their breath. Chefs cried in basmati-stained aprons. The royal gardener was occasionally summoned to consult on parsley placement. But here's the twist. She was completely healthy, never sick, always radiant. Diplomats began mimicking her diet in secret, hoping for some kind of tweezer blossom effect. To Banu, food was more than fuel, it was an act of visual meditation. And if that doesn't sound exhausting enough, the next queen divorced Charlemagne because he snored like a goat and gave her hellish nightmares. Queen Desiderata divorced Charlemagne over goat snores. Queen Desiderata of the Lombards didn't just file for royal divorce, she filed it with flair, brutal honesty, and a few unsparing metaphors. Her husband? Charlemagne. Yes, that Charlemagne. The founder of the Holy Roman Empire, the great unifier of Europe, the guy with a crown, a sword, and allegedly the snore of a demon goat stuck in a wind tunnel. According to court rumors and Desiderata herself, his nocturnal serenades were so horrific they caused her actual nightmares. Not dreams, nightmares. Repeated visions of falling into fiery pits, chased by bleating demons, and woken up gasping. At some point, she decided enough was enough. She told her advisors she'd rather face political exile than another night of goat hell lullabies. The divorce didn't go smoothly. Charlemagne didn't take rejection well. He spun it as a political break, claimed religious incompatibility, and tried to erase her from records. But Desiderata left with her dignity intact and her sleep schedule restored. Sometimes power isn't worth losing your REM cycle. And if you're already reeling from marital ghost goats, just wait until you meet the empress who demanded her tea be brewed with the first snow of winter, or else she'd grow invisible. Empress Xiaozhuang's vanishing snow tea. Empress Xiaozhuang of the Qing dynasty had simple tea preferences. The leaves had to be green, the pot had to be porcelain, and the water had to be melted snow from the very first winter snowfall. Anything less, she warned, would make her grow invisible. No one knew what that meant. Disappear politically, spiritually, physically? No one asked. They just ran into the mountains with silver basins at the first snowflake sighting, praying not to return with second snow mediocrity. The snow was melted in moonlight. The water was steeped with a specific blend of jasmine and secrecy. Xiaozhuang would sip slowly, eyes closed, as if the tea carried coded messages from nature. Some said her skin glowed afterward. Others said she whispered to the cup. Either way, no one dared serve her regular boiled water again. Her belief in ritual wasn't just poetic, it was law. She ruled behind the curtain of mysticism, guiding emperors and politics with a gentle hand and a firm grip on seasonal weather patterns. And speaking of seasonal disappearances, let's move on to the Moroccan queen, who vanished so completely, people thought she became an astronaut. Queen Lalla Salma's astronaut disappearance. Queen Lalla Salma of Morocco was a modern royal with stunning red curls, a degree in engineering, and a talent for making monarchy look like high fashion, and then one day, she was gone. No scandal, no announcement, just poof. Vanished from public view like a royal magic trick with no applause. At first, the tabloids whispered the usual nonsense. Illness, divorce, a spiritual retreat. Then things got weird. A rumor surfaced that she hadn't disappeared, she'd been recruited for a secret astronaut program. People swore they saw her in training footage. In a NASA facility. On a runway with zero-gravity boots. Did she ascend into orbit to escape palace life? Was she orbiting Earth in silence, sipping mint tea among the stars? No one could say. The Moroccan palace remained silent for years. Her disappearance became one of the strangest unsolved royal mysteries in recent history. Photos vanished. Mentions were scrubbed. But her impact, her style, her reforms, her quiet power still lingered. And speaking of queens who preferred unusual court company, up next is the one who ruled Spain with a mechanical puppet named Pepito, who had the final say on all appointments. Queen Isabella II and Pepito the puppet advisor. Queen Isabella II of Spain didn't trust politicians. She barely trusted priests. But one entity she did trust unconditionally? A mechanical puppet named Pepito. Yes, Pepito. Roughly 18 inches tall, constructed of wood, gears, and mild nightmares. Dressed in miniature court attire and perched on a velvet cushion, Pepito served as Isabella's personal advisor and had the final say on court appointments. Here's how it worked. A minister would propose a name. The queen would turn to Pepito, who was equipped with a crank mechanism and a tiny bell. If the puppet nodded and rang the bell, the candidate was approved. If he stayed still or wobbled disapprovingly, the name was struck from the list. No arguments. The puppet had spoken. At first, courtiers thought it was a joke. Then they realized it wasn't. Isabella insisted Pepito channeled the clarity of spirit that humans lacked. Some suspected a hidden string operator or a court jester pulling levers behind a curtain. Others genuinely believed she was using the puppet to dodge blame while asserting absolute control. Either way, ministers started buttering up the puppet just in case. And speaking of manipulative mascots, next is the Empress who installed a three-eyed tiger statue to terrify her husband's concubines into fearing pregnancy. Empress Gao's pregnancy-cursing tiger statue. Empress Gao of the Han Dynasty knew how to weaponize home decor. In her private chambers, she installed a life-sized three-eyed tiger statue with one purpose: to scare the absolute fertility out of her husband's concubines. According to court rumor, the statue could curse pregnancies, specifically unapproved pregnancies. The tiger wasn't just menacing, it was spiritual. The third eye, she claimed, could see truths unborn. It glowed in torchlight. It watched everyone. Women who passed near it reportedly had nightmares, sudden nausea, or just mysteriously left the palace entirely. Gao didn't have to lift a finger, the tiger did all the intimidation for her. Pregnancy in the imperial palace was political dynamite. One wrong heir and the whole dynasty could tilt. Empress Gao understood this better than anyone. She couldn't always control the emperor's wandering attention, but she could control the consequences. And if that meant installing a demon-eyed jungle predator next to the incense burner, so be it. Court artists refused to sketch it. Servants walked backwards around it. The tiger became legend, and so did she. But if you think flexing through felines is strange, wait until you meet the queen who shot arrows with her toes while eating grapes just to flex on her guests. Queen Amanitore's toes, grapes, and archery. Queen Amanitore of Kush didn't just host royal banquets, she performed at them. And not with music or poetry, but with toe archery. Picture it. The queen reclined on a silk-draped platform, hand-fed grapes by servants, while firing arrows across the courtyard using only her feet. According to those lucky or traumatized enough to witness it, her flexibility was matched only by her accuracy. Targets, smashed. Torches, snuffed. Occasionally, she'd send an apple, spinning off a guard's helmet for added flair. She claimed it demonstrated balance, discipline, and dominance. Everyone else just nodded, terrified to ask follow-up questions. But it wasn't just a party trick. Archery was a symbol of strength in Nubian culture, and Amanitore's mastery, hands-free, no less was a royal message in motion. I control my body, my court, and this entire kingdom. Try me. Foreign envoys were stunned, local nobles reconsidered rebellion, and dinner was never boring. And speaking of dramatic entrances, wait until you meet the queen who had her parasol held by a falcon in a jeweled hood who routinely tried to escape mid-ceremony. Queen Ranavalona III's escapist falcon butler. Queen Ranavalona III of Madagascar had a flair for grandeur and an even bigger flair for questionable practicality. Her royal parasol wasn't carried by a servant, a lady-in-waiting, or even a page boy. It was carried, held, balanced, and sometimes dragged by a falcon. A living, sharp-beaked, freedom-obsessed falcon named Rami, perched regally beneath a jeweled hood. The theory was elegant. Rami would grip a gold-handled parasol in his talons while flying just above the queen, shading her with divine grace and feathers. The reality? Total chaos. Falcons are not known for patience or interest in protocol. Rami would regularly flap away mid-ceremony, parasol tilting behind him like an airborne parasitic kite. Servants scrambled. Nobles ducked. One time, the bird allegedly dropped the parasol onto a visiting duke. He considered it an omen and immediately left the island. Ranavalona, unbothered, simply said the falcon had royal instincts. Despite the logistical nightmare, she never switched to human help. Why? Because to her, nothing said untouchable monarch quite like being shaded by a creature that might bolt at any moment. And if airborne parasols don't unsettle you, the next empress made state decisions using fortune-telling mushrooms, and no one dared question her garden. Empress Ma's moonlit mushroom cabinet. Empress Ma of the Ming dynasty didn't need advisors, she had mushrooms. Specifically, a rare variety grown under moonlight, in a walled garden, guarded night and day by imperial eunuchs and one extremely paranoid botanist. These fungi weren't for soup, they were for prophecy. Each morning, Ma would visit the garden, meditate beside her mushroom beds, and listen to their guidance. If a cap tilted east, she postponed a trade deal. If one sprouted in the shape of a dragon's tail, war was inevitable. If none grew at all, she declared a national fast. Ministers tried gently to suggest more traditional counsel. She responded by replacing half of them with gardeners. Policy briefs were rewritten as botanical metaphors. The phrase, "consult the spore," became official palace lingo. Was it madness or method? Under her mushroom-rained administration, the empire experienced eerie stability. Trade boomed. Crops flourished. Maybe the mushrooms knew something. Or maybe fear of offending her fungal friends kept everyone oddly obedient. One thing certain, her garden was feared more than her guards. And speaking of mysterious endings, up next is the legendary Assyrian queen who turned into a dove and flew away, refusing to die like a common mortal. Queen Semiramis and the final flight. Queen Semiramis of Assyria didn't retire. She ascended. One minute she was ruling empires, issuing decrees and terrifying generals. The next, she supposedly turned into a dove and flew away into the sky. Just like that. No funeral, no tomb, no body, only feathers and legend. Depending on which chronicler you trust, and let's be honest, none of them agree, Semiramis either vanished in a beam of light, transformed on a balcony in front of a horrified servant, or simply walked into the palace gardens and never returned. In every version, a dove appears, graceful and radiant, and no one ever sees the queen again. Some historians call it a myth, crafted by scribes to deify a powerful woman in a patriarchal world. Others suggest she staged her disappearance to escape palace politics and start over. Still, others think she planned the transformation narrative herself, because if anyone could orchestrate her own divine exit, it was Semiramis. No one knows where she's buried, if she's buried at all. But her name lived on for centuries, whispered like a spell in royal courts and battlefield camps. And if flying into the sky seems a bit too peaceful, just wait for the queen whose pet bear once slapped a nobleman for insulting her perfume. Queen Helen of Serbia and the perfume slapping bear. Queen Helen of Serbia believed in loyalty, elegance, and vengeance by bear. Her most famous companion wasn't a lady-in-waiting or a royal hound, it was a pet bear. A massive, furry, vaguely untrainable creature that followed her through the palace, lounged beside her throne, and once famously slapped a nobleman across the face for daring to insult the queen's perfume. The scent in question was reportedly a custom blend of jasmine, cedar, and something ominously labeled Highland resin. The nobleman sniffed, grimaced, and mumbled something about forest floor and funeral spices. That's when the bear, likely cued by some unseen hand signal, or possibly divine intuition, stood on its hind legs and smacked him across the mouth. The entire court froze. Queen Helen simply nodded and said, "He was warned." No one ever commented on her perfume again, or stood too close to the bear. Some claimed she raised the creature from a cub. Others believed it was the reincarnated spirit of a former husband. Whatever the truth, it became her personal bouncer and spiritual bodyguard. And if bear diplomacy sounds intense, just wait for the Empress who led armies while riding a pink-dyed yak named Princess Storm. Empress Shuluping and Princess Storm, the pink yak of war. Empress Shuluping of the Khitan Empire never subscribed to the idea of subtle military leadership. While other commanders rode war horses clad in steel, Shuluping chose something bolder, fluffier, and wildly more distracting. A yak. But not just any yak. This one was dyed bright pink and named Princess Storm. Yes, Princess Storm, a title that confused enemies, terrified allies, and required an entire squad of soldiers just to comb her before battle. Shuluping would ride into campaigns with her hair braided in copper wire, a jeweled spear in hand, and Princess Storm trotting beneath her like a cotton candy battering ram. The visual alone was enough to make rival generals question their own life choices. According to battlefield tales, the yak's arrival was always preceded by the sound of bells and the scent of perfumed wind. Her logic? Psychological warfare. Nobody's prepared for a pink yak, and if you laugh, you're already underestimating her. Troops claimed she once negotiated a surrender without dismounting, simply by staring from atop her pastel steed. But if furry spectacle isn't impressive enough, brace yourself for the queen who tricked the Pope into hiding in a well during a prank gone extremely sideways. Queen Matilda of Tuscany and the Pope in the well. Queen Matilda of Tuscany was a formidable power broker in the tangled mess of medieval Italian politics, but behind the armor and diplomatic treaties lay a wicked sense of humor and zero fear of holy retaliation. One day, she decided to play a harmless prank on the Pope. Spoiler, it involved, a lot of screaming and about 2 weeks of political fallout. The prank began with a staged ghost sighting in the royal courtyard. Matilda, ever the dramatist, convinced her papal guest that a cursed spirit had been seen wandering the estate. To protect him, she offered a holy hiding place, which, naturally, was a decorated stone well, covered in satin and mistletoe, very dignified. The Pope, either terrified or deeply gullible, descended, and Matilda? She closed the lid, just for a moment, maybe an hour, maybe 2. When he was finally pulled out, soaked, furious, and mumbling Latin curses, she claimed it was a test of humility. Somehow, he forgave her. Eventually, from that day on, the well was nicknamed Saintly Silence. And speaking of thrones with less than dignified foundations, next comes the Angolan queen who used a kneeling servant as a literal chair during peace talks. Queen Ananzinga and the human throne. Queen Ananzinga of Ndongo didn't need a throne to establish power. She built her own, using the spine of colonial arrogance and a single kneeling man. During a critical 17th century peace negotiation with Portuguese officials, the colonizers, always the subtle diplomats, refused to offer her a chair, a symbolic move meant to demonstrate superiority. Ananzinga did not blink. She motioned to one of her attendants, who immediately dropped to his knees. Without missing a beat, she sat on his back, dignified, composed, and unshaken. Then she proceeded with the negotiations as if nothing unusual was happening, while everyone else sat in the sour soup of their own awkwardness. That single act became legendary, not just as a moment of savage dignity, but as a lesson in improvised power. If they won't give you a seat at the table, turn someone into one, and make sure everyone watches. After the talks, the Portuguese gave her more than a chair. They gave her respect. Temporarily, of course. But the message stuck. And speaking of power through silence, the next empress believed good luck could only enter the palace if she didn't speak a word for 1 month every year. Empress Xiao Qingxian's month of royal silence. Empress Xiao Qingxian of the Qing dynasty held power through whispers, literally none of them her own. Every year, she took a vow of complete silence for an entire month, not as a religious retreat, not as punishment, but because she believed that speaking during that time would scare away good luck. The palace adjusted. Ministers learned to interpret her gestures like sacred semaphore. A raised eyebrow could mean war. A sharp glance might signal a wedding. She carried a lacquered fan and tapped coded patterns on her knee when things got urgent. Petitioners were warned. If Her Majesty stares at you silently for more than 3 seconds, consider yourself answered. And yes, someone was always stationed nearby to interpret the silences, though no one could ever be sure if they got it right. Some believed this ritual began after a fortune teller told her, "Words carry weight, and your palace is sinking." Others said she simply enjoyed the peace. Whatever the reason, no one dared challenge it. The empire ran on quiet tension and eye contact. And speaking of royal quirks taken to ethereal extremes, meet the queen who slept on eagle feathers and crushed pearls to protect herself from night demons. Queen Theodelinda's nightmare-proof mattress. Queen Theodelinda of the Lombards wasn't just concerned with diplomacy in dynasties. She was obsessed with dream hygiene, Her bed wasn't filled with straw or goose down. It was stuffed with eagle feathers and crushed pearls, a mattress so absurdly decadent it made other royal beds feel like haystacks in comparison. But this wasn't about comfort. According to Theodolinda, eagle feathers frightened off evil spirits, and pearls smashed into iridescent dust repelled demonic visits during REM sleep. This was less mattress, more spiritual bunker. Her ladies-in-waiting reportedly wore gloves when making the bed, and no one, not even her husband, was allowed to lie on it without first being anointed with lavender oil and murmured blessings. Court physicians rolled their eyes. Priests raised eyebrows. But Theodolinda slept like a stone slab in a holy crypt, unbothered, untouched by nightmares, and spiritually radiant. Some say her protection extended beyond sleep. Visitors who stood near her chamber door reported a strange sense of calm, like standing inside a prayer. And speaking of obsessive interiors, up next is the Empress who replaced her entire bedroom with doll-sized furniture because normal-sized things just didn't match her aesthetic. Empress Yingtian's dollhouse bedroom aesthetic. Empress Yingtian of the Song dynasty had everything a ruler could want: wealth, influence, art, and a bedroom that looked like it belonged to a porcelain ghost. At one point during her reign, she ordered her entire sleeping chamber to be redesigned using doll-sized furniture. Tiny chairs, miniature tables, a bed that would barely fit a cat. And no, this wasn't a joke or a brief phase. It was her official royal retreat. She called it an aesthetic cleanse. Ministers called it deeply confusing. But the Empress insisted that shrinking her surroundings helped her see the world more clearly. It was a place of forced humility, where she had to crouch, kneel, and fold herself like origami just to sit. Visitors weren't allowed inside unless they passed a gracefulness test. No bumping, tripping, or accidental squashing of royal decor. If you stepped on the embroidery or sneezed near the thimble-sized tea set, you were never invited back. Some said the space reflected her inner world, contained, ordered, and full of secrets. Others believed it was a performance, a way to remind people that grandeur doesn't always come in big packages. And if you're not claustrophobic yet, prepare for the queen who banned sandals in court because bare feet revealed the truth. Queen Kura of Ugarit and the sandal ban of honesty. Queen Kura of ancient Ugarit didn't care what robes you wore, how many rings you stacked, or how poetically you bowed. What mattered to her was your feet. Specifically, your bare feet. She believed that shoes, especially sandals, were instruments of deception. They concealed guilt, pride, and all the little ticks of dishonesty that the toes supposedly betrayed. So, she banned them. In court, no one was allowed to wear sandals. Not nobles, not servants, not visiting diplomats. If you wanted an audience with Queen Kura, you had to show up barefoot. Calloused? Crooked? Too bad. Clean feet were considered suspect. Only those with the wear of honest labor were truly welcome. Advisors scrambled to justify this policy. Philosophers claimed it was rooted in the ancient belief that the soul entered the earth through the soles. Courtiers just got really into pumice stones and toenail oils. She claimed she could read intent in arches, betrayal in the curl of a toe. People lie, she once said, but feet flinch. And if that's not strange enough, next comes the Egyptian queen who wore a beehive hairstyle made of actual beeswax and may have invented the world's first insect-repellent updo, Queen Ahmose Nefertari and the beeswax beehive. Queen Ahmose Nefertari, revered matriarch of Egypt's 18th dynasty, didn't just carry power, she wore it, literally, on her head. Her hairstyle was an immense, towering beehive, not the modern kind, but a coiled conical sculpture made from real beeswax, sculpted, perfumed, and reinforced by royal stylists who doubled as engineers. This wasn't vanity, it was ritual. The beehive was believed to connect her with divine fertility, protection, and perhaps most practically, to repel insects. The summer heat in Thebes was not kind, and mosquitoes were relentless. But the wax infused with herbs and oils acted as both a shield and a signal. Do not mess with this woman. Temple priests claimed her hair hummed with sacred frequency. Some even believed bees were drawn to her head in homage, though no official stings were reported. Her portraits show her standing tall, unbothered, utterly regal, as though gravity itself feared the consequences of tipping her off balance. Over time, her style was copied by nobles, then simplified for public festivals, but no one ever matched the original buzz. And next, we dive into the eerie morning routine of an empress who blessed the crops by standing on rooftops at dawn using only her shadow. Empress Mei's shadow blessing rituals. Empress Mei of the Jin dynasty believed her body contained something more powerful than gold, armies, or ink on a scroll, her shadow. Each morning before sunrise, she would climb to the palace rooftop, dressed in ceremonial silks that rippled like a dream, and stand perfectly still, arms outstretched, waiting for the first light of day. This wasn't performance art. She genuinely believed her shadow blessed the fields, that as the sun rose and her silhouette spilled across the palace gardens and beyond, crops would grow faster, fruit would ripen sweeter, and the empire's fortune would swell with the morning light. Servants were forbidden from casting shadows during this time, lest they dilute the blessing. Birds were shooed, clouds were cursed, and mirrors were covered, all to give Empress Mei's silhouette an unbroken stretch of earth to touch. Farmers began showing up outside the palace, holding handfuls of soil in the path of her shadow like it was holy water. Ministers scheduled meetings after sunrise just to avoid blocking the light. She once delayed a war council because the fields haven't absorbed me yet. And if you think standing still to bless wheat is intense, meet the queen who wrote blood-soaked revenge poetry with a thorn and mailed it anonymously. Queen Sasuk's blood-inked vengeance poems. Queen Sasuk of Goryeo didn't believe in slander or assassination. No, she believed in poetry. Specifically, poetry written in her own blood, penned with a thorn, and sent anonymously, of course, to political enemies as cryptic little warnings. The messages were simple. A verse about betrayal, maybe a metaphor involving withering orchids or a river that forgets its own source, all delicately inscribed in crimson ink. The recipient would find it slipped beneath their door. No signature, just poetry and panic. At first, they thought it was a prank. Then the demotions started. Then the accidents. Then the whispering. Everyone in court began tiptoeing around Queen Sasuk like she was a dagger wrapped in silk. They feared her notebooks more than her guards. She never admitted to writing them, but when confronted, she once smiled and said, "Every flower has its root in the red," which didn't exactly help her case. Years later, those blood poems were collected in a secret volume called the Thorn Archive. Most copies vanished. And speaking of dramatic exits, next up is a queen who took things a step further by being buried with hundreds of gold-plated frogs to sing her back to life. Queen Abar's resurrection by amphibian choir. Queen Abar of Kush wasn't one for subtle afterlives. When it came time to plan her burial, she didn't settle for a simple tomb or a ceremonial jar. No, she requested to be laid to rest surrounded by hundreds of gold-plated frogs. Why frogs? Because, according to her belief, when the gods were ready, the frogs would sing her back to life. Not croak, sing, harmoniously. Her burial chamber became less of a resting place and more of a gilded terrarium. The frogs were crafted with open mouths and embedded with tiny bells, meant to chime at the lightest vibration. When the desert winds blew through the crypt's hidden vents, the tomb rang with soft, eerie music, an amphibian lullaby echoing across eternity. She believed the frog was a sacred symbol of rebirth, fertile, ancient, a creature of both water and land. But gilded? That was Queen Abar's personal twist, immortality with style. Even today, her tomb remains one of the strangest ever uncovered. Nobody ever found, just the frogs, all perfectly arranged, eternally waiting to serenade a queen who might just rise with the right song. And with that, we close the scroll on 99 queens and their absolutely bonkers, brilliant, and baffling lives.